Hello, Heather.
Hey.
I love your jacket.
Thank you. I thought I'm bringing the rock and roll to Danny Jones.
I love it.
Yeah, awesome.
I'm a huge fan of your work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Your background, you started working in a mystery school or something like this? Connected to the United Nations?
Oh, not really, but sort of. You got that.
Okay.
Mystery school dropout is what I try to put on my, I'm proud of that. I guess I'm actually a lot of school dropouts, so that should be an interesting thing. I actually dropped out of high school, left home when I was 16 years old and traveled the country and did van life before. That was a cool thing. Yeah, it was wow for a minute. It got a little hard after I, end up traveling through the West, and a lot of fun though, a lot of misadventures. Probably one of the most transformative of those adventures was my jaunt into around Area 51. So I think this is where a lot of my interest in the so-called paranormal started, actually. I spent a lot of time driving, and this was before internet radio and that sort of thing. So I had the radio. And you can only listen to so much Bob Seger and country music in Middle America, before it just starts to get a little much. And so I tuned into late night radio and, of course, Art Bell. And at the time, that was George Norrie. And so I'm listening to that and then in the evenings and staring out in the desert, and just, it was the whole experience, right? And I'm thinking, oh, this is sweet. 16, 17 years old. And so I used to think, wow, these people are so amazing. I love these guests. I just wish that someday I could just know people that interesting and talk to people that interesting. And so it was kind of a full circle moment when I was able to be on that show. But aside from that, I spent some time kind of in the desert and exploring it as a kid would. And I have the funniest little story. It was very minor, but at the time it was a little transformative. So I park in the middle of the road, off to the side, and I start walking through where I thought maybe Area 51 was and that whole area. And I go and I notice all those signs that say, don't go any further. The government reserves the right to shoot you if you go any further. And I thought, wait, what? Of course, I'm a trusting kid, so I thought, wait a second. And there wasn't a clear enough, I don't think, demarcation either about where they would actually shoot you. And I think that disoriented me a little bit. And it's the desert. I'm looking around why did I stray so far from my car? What's going on? And it just spooked me a little. And so I started going back, and I got into the car, and I was like, I think I'm out of here. And then I noticed the quintessential black vehicles coming down the ridge and coming after me. Now, they were just doing their basic job of what they do, because I wasn't anywhere near it. But it was enough for me and my Pontiac Sunbird at the time, driving with these cars behind me. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm white knuckling it. What is going on? I've seen the X-Files. I know what's going on. What the fuck, Yeah. And I'm just I stopped. They were just kind of behind me. And then they drove off. And I thought, for the first time, maybe the government isn't our friend, which is just oh, duh. But, I'm a kid. I didn't know. And I was they could shoot me for that. And I was already a runaway. So if somebody would have shot me there and something would have happened, I would have never been found. I would have been on a milk carton or something. Wow. So it was kind of a moment of snapping into reality. I don't know. It reminded me of a film this is an old film. It was indie film too, but it was I can't remember what it was called exactly, but it was about a bunch of these boys who were really into rap and this sort of thing, and they end up going into a ghetto in Chicago because they were trying to emulate their favorite rappers, and they're in there talking all street and thinking this is so cool, and then shit hits the fan and it gets really dark really quick. So it was that moment of realization that some of these topics seem fun until they become real. And then that's when you have to say, wait a second. And it's sort of a moment of realization. And so I think my first moment of realization was in that desert, knowing that I didn't get anywhere near the actual Area 51, but it was enough to say something's here. And, maybe it's just government, maybe it's just whatever. But at the same time, yes, White Boys.
Movie, White Boys?
Yeah,
oh, yeah,
yes,
it's classic.
That is a funny one. And yeah, it's great. It's a dark comedy. I recommend it. It's kind of corny and from the time period. But yeah, great film that kind of just, I think, it's what's needed to see when you're a young person maybe, and you think, oh, I'm into this like subculture and I'm doing this stuff, and it gets real on you. You know, people who dabble, a lot of teenagers, a lot of young people, they say, oh, I like this aesthetic, I like this stuff, you know.
Right.
We joke a lot about, you know, of course, the Satanism and the stereotypical view of like a Satanist. You think of like, you know, a kid who's all goth and wearing a pentagram, like the Hot Topic kids. And it's like, you know, they're really typically not the Satanists. They're typically not the ones you have to worry about. They're into the aesthetic. It's just, you know, subversive. It's like rock and roll. But it's sometimes the things that are just beneath the surface or hidden in plain sight, as they say. I know it's super cliche, that then gets you to think, wait a second, maybe there's something real to it. So like, how real does it get? And that's something that I stumbled upon when I was actually teaching at a college. And so as I said, I did drop out of like real school. I ended up going back though. I started at a community college and you know, did the responsible thing. So I thought like, I'll take business courses and just did that. And then I ended up taking art history and archaeology. And I just thought I'm going to follow that through. And, you know, because of the encouragement of a professor of art history, I thought, well, you know, maybe I have something here. Maybe this is something that I could do. And so it became something that stayed with me for a long time. I thought I want to go back to community college when I'm done with this, and I'm going to teach, and I'm going to try to make a difference, you know, in the lives. It's, you know, kind of like a trope, but it really meant something to me. So I always had that in the back of my head. But then I ended up going to state school and then master's and doctorate. So I didn't drop out. I ended up going all the way through. But I followed the path of history. I kind of had a varied background. It was archaeology, anthropology, information technology, and then a master's in history, and then a doctorate in education. I worked in museums too.
What, any specific lane in archaeology or any specific area you focused on?
Yeah, for my actual graduate work, it ended up being economic history, which was quite a surprise because it sounded boring, right? Like just math. At the time, of course, to me, that's what it sounded like. But the reason I stumbled into it was I was initially interested in Western esotericism. And it's like, well, how do you find that through line into economic history? Well, I started following the money. That was always the thing, is when it comes down to it, often you will find that everything's about the money. And not just the money itself, the cash, but the management of our resources, including people. So that's what I kind of focused on. But at the same time, I was studying the Sumerians. And I was studying the topic that I think makes a lot of people kind of like nowadays either very excited, maybe for the wrong reasons, or just totally roll their eyes. And that's when I started writing a little bit on the Anunnaki. And so that took a different trajectory altogether. And I remember the first person that encouraged me to go in that direction. And again, I didn't have a support system. So, you know, through college, I had professors, and then I had authors that I liked. And one of those authors happened to be Michael Cremo of Forbidden Archaeology, a very good book. Like, it's huge. It's like the
Sounds
Bible.
Very familiar, that name.
Yeah. He's one of the greats. And I wrote to him because he was one of the people on the board. There was a whiteboard on like, seriously, like day, I think it was probably 2 of Archaeology 101, like basic stuff here. And they had all these names up on the board, and they were like, we're going to debunk these individuals. And I'm like, wait, I was listening to Coast and these shows. I'm like, I recognize some of these individuals.
Is Graham Hancock up there?
Yes, actually. And unsurprisingly. And I thought, I don't think I'm in the right position to be debunking anybody at this point. I'm literally a community college student in like day 2.
What a weird way to approach learning.
Right? That was my whole thought. I was like, but I wasn't, again, I was always kind of trusting like the government wouldn't hurt us.
Right.
And then I was like, I just paid, you know, $700 total for these textbooks.
Right.
Surely they're right.
Yeah.
Surely that, yeah. So a lot of learning has happened since then, obviously.
Yeah.
But I was skeptical at the time. I thought, I don't feel that I wanted to debunk them necessarily because I'm kind of a fan, right? So I realized that most...
Like, wow, this guy got me into archaeology. And day 1, you're trying to get me to like take him down?
Right,
wow.
100%. And I thought, you got to meet people where they are. And that was the start of my actual like in the system, sort of like bucking of trends and pushing up against stuff, because I got very involved in the program and ended up being a teaching assistant and doing a lot of different excavations and projects. And then I worked for a community research program that was through the school, where I was doing grant funding and the typical things, of course, the money part of it. And I started to learn the inner workings of the actual job that it is to be in the cultural resource management field, and not just like, archaeology is like cool, we're going to find some cool shit, whatever. No, it wasn't like that. It was, I got involved, and I think two things stuck out to me. One was that a lot of the program initially, like as soon as you get in, it was, let's try to discuss ethics and this sort of thing, fine. But they were all these things that were outlined by the American Anthropological Association and other bodies who sort of govern the field. And again, totally fine, I suppose. But what you start to see is that it's like Project Mockingbird, where everything gets filtered through this, what Michael Cremo called the knowledge filter. Shout out to Michael Cremo. But he put the knowledge filter out as this idea, and I started seeing it in live time. And I think what was disconcerting to me was that there was this entire focus not on completely teaching us methodology, but teaching us how to, become like Flint Dibbles. Like the whole job was basically, how can we be an apologist for the field? How can we make sure that we don't allow pseudoscience or pseudo-archaeology to have any kind of influence on anybody? It felt like it was activist training and not methodology. And I was like, this is sticking out to me as something really strange. But, I'm rolling with it, because what do I know? I'm trying to learn. And then I go and I'm in this program, and they were like, well, can you make us some flyers for Archaeology Day at the museum? I'm like, sweet, yeah, I'll do that. They didn't oversee the project, so I made these flyers with like this skull and a melting candle, and it was like in this cave, and it was like really kind of, I thought, pretty cool. And I brought them dutifully to the table. I put them down, and I had all this stuff, and the thing went off as planned, and afterwards I got a stern talking to, because I was sensationalizing archaeology, and it was like not what we're supposed to do.
Not allowed to make it fun.
Not allowed to make it fun, exactly. And I'm like, you have to meet people where they are. This was not an academic course. This was a day to bring the public in and just sort of like walk by a table, grab your little swag and a candy and a little bit of paper and print collateral. Like, of course we should make it fun. But no, and I came across little like hints like that we were on a mission. And the mission was never finding out the truth about the past. It was self-preservation in nature. And I thought, interesting. And then, of course, I ran across a bunch of money issues. Like I was finding grant money for a program that didn't actually exist. It was told to me at this like beautiful gala to, again, community college in Ohio. So this is not like, we're not talking a huge endowment, although they have a huge endowment. Again, think about how deep that corruption goes. If at that community college level, you have tunnels underneath where they're ushering in big donors from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Yeah. Why would that be happening at that level? But
I'm wondering how much Leslie Wexner's attached to all that stuff. He's a big shot in Ohio.
Yeah, he is. And very wrapped up with Ohio State University too. So yeah, I mean, that money just kind of goes that way. And so it's very suspicious. And I just started seeing that, I was told this program didn't actually exist, so to speak. It was going to be there to shuffle a little money into the coffers of the summer adjuncts and some of the people on their team. They just wanted a money grab. And I started learning about the grant writing process and how it is that you use academies and things to try to, almost like a magic spell, cast spells over people to get them to give you money and do all this stuff. Again, why wasn't I learning proper methodology? I mean, it was there. I had a few professors that, of course, that was the thing, but boy, was the focus on getting free money and making sure you're covering your ass. And I just I'm done with this. I'm so over this. And I typed an email to Michael Cremo and was like, Michael Cremo, I'm really like a renegade and I just run from stuff and I'm just about out of here, like whatever. I thought I was just had it. And he emailed me back, to his credit, and was like a voice of reason to me and said, hey, you have two choices. One is to stay in the field and you can make a change and do so incrementally, or you can get out of the field and write whatever you want, but you'll lose some credibility. And at the time, I think credentialism was a lot stronger than it is now. I usually don't rely on my credentials, although I do have the Dr. Heather Lynn in front, but I say that's because if you Google Heather Lynn, you're going to find a whole lot of Heather Lynns that just have nothing to do with me.
Right.
So I put the doctor in front, but at the same time, I don't at all claim to be an absolute expert in any field that way. More of a whistleblower or something like that, or just an interested party. I think after Douglas Murray incident on Joe Rogan where he said to Dave Smith, "Have you ever been?"
Right.
I think that kind of was the shot heard around the world against credentialism.
Yeah.
That regular people are allowed to speak up and say what they've experienced. And so, I thought, I don't need these credentials. Screw this. But he talked me off the ledge and said, though it's more than credentials, of course, it's about learning the methodology. Because how can you be opposed to something you know nothing about? And I was like, oh, that's right. Settle me down here. I need that sort of adult influence. And so I stayed in and I kind of coped with it a little bit by just thinking of myself as like a double agent. Like, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to learn this stuff. And it was actually fantastic. And I did learn what I needed to. And it was a great experience. But I always kept it with me that when I'm out of here, I'm not going to go in this, I hope to go in a traditional route a little bit, but I didn't want to go in a fully traditional route and just get sucked into that, academic industrial complex. I wanted to do something different because I wanted to explore whether or not some of these weird ideas, the alternative ideas, had any kind of basis. Like, let's just apply that methodology, a serious approach to what people generally think as being unserious topics. And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do.
About a year ago, I got hit with a text about an unpaid toll. And then when I went to go pay it, I realized it was a scam. And that would not have happened if I would have been using Cash App. They stress transfers with trusted individuals, which is why I now only use Cash App. Your security deserves to be a priority, and Cash App treats it that way. With Security Lock, Cash App requires a successful Face ID or biometric authentication to access your account. It's like your money is protected by your own personal bodyguard, even if your phone is lost or stolen. Plus, if you're about to send money to someone new and Cash App notices something looks fishy, it will send you a warning before the money is sent out to confirm everything looks okay. Turn on Security Lock in your Cash App settings today and pay attention to scam warnings and keep your money safe. Learn more at cash.app/security. Moving money should be simple, but it also needs to be safe, which is why I love using Cash App. For a limited time, new Cash App customers can earn $10 when they use the code SECURE10 in their profile at sign up and send $5 to a friend within 14 days. Terms apply. Cash App is a financial services platform, not a bank. Banking services provided by Cash App Bank Partners. Prepaid debit cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Cash App Visa Debit Flex cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. And the Bancorp Bank. N.A. Pursuant to a license from Visa USA, Inc. See terms and conditions for Sutton Prepaid Card, Sutton Debit Flex Card, and Bancorp Debit Flex Card. Discounts and promotions provided by Cash App, a Block Inc. brand. Visit cash.app/legal/podcast for full disclosures. And how did you end up in this mystery school?
Well, along the way, so that was an interesting thing as well. Everything was sort of like one thing leads to another. I had none of this planned. My husband jokes that I've Mr. Magoo'd my way through everything. Does not know how. I've just not been dead or something. So I just was like, okay. I ended up writing a blog and doing some things. And so it starts with my work with the Anunnaki, strangely enough.
Okay.
And I wrote a little report that was called the Sumerian Controversy, and I put it up on Kindle for 99 cents, and I think I put it on my blog at the time, and it was about an archaeological excavation that made the news that happened in the city of Ur, modern day Iraq, of course, and so the amazing thing about this particular excavation was it was the first of its kind in decades because of all the wars, and so this was the first, and it was done from by the University of Manchester. So we know. That was the beginning of it, though, and I put some of the information out on my blog, and I had people reach out to me like, "Hey, this is very interesting. What's going on? And can we get more information on, say, stargates? Are they looking for gold? Are they looking for?" And I'm like, that was my thought too. It was just why, what? Okay, so I'm going to email the professor, and I did. And I said, can I have an interview? And they said, sure. Just submit the questions. I was like, great. So I submitted some just, talking shop style questions. And the last one I reserved for the people. And so I threw it out on my blog and I was like, all right, cool. I got like some FaceTime with this guy. What would you like to know? I'm going to have a question in there. And the majority of people wanted to know about stargates. Could they be in Mesopotamia? Could that have been the real reason we went to war in Iraq? And I'm like, whatever. I mean, to talk to people, right? Well, I was ghosted completely. And I thought, I get it, but I don't. I'm kind of like annoyed at that. You could have just said, hey, let's leave question 4 out, or I don't feel comfortable discussing that, or whatever. And so I thought, well, now I'm interested because you ghosted me. Now I want to know like what's going on. And so I thought, of course, follow the money. That's what I had learned from probably my biggest takeaway from school was follow that money. And I found that there were very interesting funders to that excavation. One of them was the head of at the time, the Baron von Dissen, the head of the Dissen family dynasty.
I've never heard of him.
So his family bankrolled the Nazis. He was Fritz Dissen, one of the patriarchs of the family, was the guy who literally gave the seed money to the Nazi party. So now why it was troubling, not just a Nazi connection, of course, but because he owned the second largest stash of antiquities in the world, second only to Queen Elizabeth II.
Whoa.
And he was specialized in Mesopotamian antiques. And I'm like, that seems like a conflict of interest, doesn't it? Okay. He's funding this.
And he funded this excavation.
Yes. He did, along with a couple other, like PricewaterhouseCoopers, some banking companies, and a big oil company called Gulf Sands Petroleum that has links to the Bushes, and it's an American company located in Texas. Was located. It has a strange, shady background. But I thought, okay, why is a big oil company funding an excavation? Not even American researchers, mind you. This was a foreign, project from the University of Manchester. And so they go, and I'm like, okay, that seems like a huge conflict of interest. So I'm looking around and trying to figure it out. And I noticed that some of the field reports were going straight to the board members of Gulf Sands Petroleum. And they had a logo for it too that looked like these two sort of Mesopotamian figures standing by like a tree that almost looked like a caduceus. It was very symbolic and strange. And I'm like, Gulf Sands Petroleum? That doesn't even make sense to me. But hey, maybe it's some philanthropy, or maybe it's something to cover their ass while they're trying to, find oil or something.
Right.
But the whole thing just got weirder and weirder when I started to get reached out to by individuals who had a vested interest in the region and the so-called Anunnaki. And I thought, well, wait, this is just taking a strange turn, because I think I'm busting some kind of a, like a typical big business corporation corruption thing that's like funding something maybe for spying purposes, because that is the history of archaeology is deeply entwined in spycraft. Period.
What?
Period. Yeah, you cannot have. Yeah. So
and why?
And why? Right. Well, okay. So that's because initially archaeology was not a science. It's kind of a new science. Okay. Again, sorry to all the people out here who want to make it like a hard science. It's still a soft science. It's a social science. There's mixed methodology. The thing is you use so many different hardcore scientific tools like LIDAR and things of that nature that it kind of takes on a veneer of like a more precise science. But at the end of the day, you still have to have a human, until their AI takes over, to kind of make the story, to piece it together. And that leaves a level of subjectivity, which is why people can argue about it so much, which is fine. It's a soft science. A lot of things are. Not psychology is too. So it's just, it exists over here. But before that, it was called antiquarianism. And it was literally a hobby of wealthy landed gentry. So what they did, and a great example of this, if anyone has ever seen the show and the films, Downton Abbey, it's like Masterpiece Theater. It's all like a soap opera essentially of like all these wealthy people. And so what that has to do with it is the Highclere Castle is Downton Abbey. That's the actual name of the castle they used for filming. The actual lord of that abbey is the guy who funded King Tut's excavation. And when he went and did that, he carried back all of the stuff and set up the display in essentially his basement in what used to be called a cabinet of curiosities. Not a cabinet, but just, a large room where you would rope it off. You'd have display cases, and you'd have some time to have your rich pals come over and have the footman hand them a drink. And you're like, look at this interesting exotic thing I found in Egypt. Hey, come over here, lovey, and taste one of these mummies. Because, they ate the mummies.
Right.
So strange things going on in the basements of castles even then. And that happened in the basement of Downton Abbey, Highclere Castle.
Was this?
In the beginning of World War One, before World War One, we're talking about the turn of the century. So leading up from like the Victorian era into the transition after World War One.
Okay.
And so what ended up happening was, because of the war, this kind of boys' club of taking all of this, these resources and going out. And imagine, though, how expensive and laborious it would be to go across the seas and do like an archaeological excavation in, say, 1860. Mm-hmm. So you really could only be somebody super wealthy to do that, and have also the interest in looting and subjugating or doing whatever it is. Right. And that's who felt they would do that. So it was essentially the people who were like lords and whatever, had titles in Britain and Europe. Of course, some Americans did it too, but it was really just a game for the elites in Europe. Well, at the turn of the century, though, after World War I, overall socioeconomic conditions started to change for people. A lot of boys were killed in the war. People started to think, what are we doing? So, socialism was trying to bubble up a little bit, and there were, early signs of protesting, civil rights, that sort of thing. And a lot of these so-called landed gentry, the gentlemen, they lost their properties. They lost their land. A lot of it became part of the public trust. So because of like socialist ideas, they would come in and take these large properties and say, you don't need like all this land. Give some of this land up. We'll make it a public park. Even now you have these beautiful, great homes in the UK that are used for maybe like weddings and events and things and tourism. Some of the families still own them. Mm-hmm. But it was a great transition of that lifestyle, that old world lifestyle, going into like a new world order. And that happened during the World War I. And people were starting to buck trends. And the people who were involved in antiquarianism saw the writing on the wall and said, ooh, our little like hobby is just not going to look good to people. People who want us to be more open, for us to start sharing our excavations. And so they kind of made deals with universities, museums, and that sort of thing to donate all of the things that could have been in those cabinets of curiosities, to have them on public display in the public trust. So they belong to the people now. Although when you go to those museums, you'll still see the labels beside that say, generously loaned to us by the whatever family, the Thyssen family or whomever. Mm-hmm. And but essentially what they needed to do was legitimize their hobby of going to other countries and not only taking things from them and studying. Now, I, in fairness, it's not as though some of these individuals didn't do work and didn't put out good work studying it. They had access, and so they did. But at the same time, it was just a very different time and a different field altogether that legitimized itself much later and said it was a scientific endeavor, got wrapped up with universities and museums, and was more answering to the public. But did it really ever, or has it always just been kind of a rich man's sport?
What about the spying?
So the spying, because you are over in these other regions, right, it gives you great cover to be able to say, we're just doing research. Mm-hmm. We have to understand the culture. We have to live there. We have to do like participant observation or ethnography. We have to speak the language. We have to do all of that. Well, if you do that, it's not going to be wasted. The government's going to come in and fund a lot of this through the university systems, through the museums, through this whole thing. But that's why famous archaeologists like Gertrude Bell, ones that were kind of starting around the time of World War I before, where they are going to the Middle East mostly. Lawrence of Arabia, a lot of this had to do with going to the Middle East and redrawing the maps. They were called the kingmakers. They were the literal kingmakers. They would go and make deals with different heads of tribes and say, we can make you king. But they were being supported by the government to do these things, to redraw the lines of the map in the Middle East that early as part of a great project.
So do you think some of these big oil executives and archaeologist types, do you think they had a real interest in ancient Sumeria and what was happening back then? Or do you think this was just all an excuse just to extract oil and get more money?
All of the above, because I think more than one thing can be true at once. So I think ultimately you have a general interest in the financial gains of it. Mm-hmm. But like many of these things, you'll find people who also have their pet projects that they want funded, will have their own interests, and those interests often lie in my experience and opinion, stranger endeavors. So you see this, I think most notably with the Nazi Anunnaki. They had the whole section devoted to archaeology. They funded a lot of archaeological excavations and research. They were doing that to, serve humanity for science and that sort of thing, but then also look for the spear of destiny and all of these weird things that would legitimize their power in their mind. So the individuals who were working at the Anunnaki, they weren't necessarily on board with trying to find a spear of destiny to give the Nazi superpowers, but they were there working, and so they're part of a greater machine. Right. And so likewise, the same thing, in my view, happened with the excavation at Tel Khyber, which was you have this academic industrial complex going on, and it's being funded by people with ties to Nazi banking, people with ties to hoarding and collecting antiquities. And then you have the individual, say, professors or workers on the ground. They're not necessarily part of any kind of grand conspiracy. There's plausible deniability all around, but the whole thing just says there's something strange going on here. And it's just not as clear as it would seem. But all this is readily available online too. You can go to the the Foreign Office and find it's all over the British records. I cite some of those materials in one of my books discussing just that whole relationship with spycraft and archaeology. It was used primarily as a cover for spying operations, and in some cases still is, which is also why some archaeologists that I know have been detained in Turkey and places, not because they were spying, but because in other countries they're aware of the potential for spying. And so sometimes they will detain archaeologists who are just doing their jobs and say, let's ask some questions like, why are you here? What are you doing? That sort of thing. So, yeah.
Grilling season has arrived. And let's be honest, the difference between a good cookout and a great cookout is the quality of your meat, which is why I've been using ButcherBox. For over a decade, ButcherBox has led the industry with meat and seafood that's antibiotic-free, hormone-free, and independently verified. Because when it comes to fueling your body, quality isn't extra, it's everything. Clean, whole protein means better support for strength, metabolism, and steady all-day energy that we're all chasing. ButcherBox sends over 100 premium protein choices from grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, crate-free pork, and wild-caught seafood. Everything is hormone and antibiotic-free, and it meets the same strict standards whether it's a filet mignon or chicken nuggets. I do lots of cookouts during the summer, and I always find myself reaching for ButcherBox for their incredible deals and their clean meat selections. And it's great not having to deal with the grocery stores, other shoppers, or out-of-stock shelves. They're a certified B Corp, which means they care about how animals are raised, how their teams are treated, and how they impact the planet. As an exclusive offer, new listeners can get their choice between a free ribeye or top sirloin for a year, or ground beef and bacon for a year, plus $20 off when you go to butcherbox.com/Danny. That's right, your choice of ribeye or top sirloin for a year, or ground beef and bacon for a year, plus $20 off your first box and free shipping always. That's butcherbox.com/Danny. And don't forget to use the link below so they know we sent you.
Now you have something I think that draws other strange people into the mix. You have a convergence of ancient history, money, of course, the question of who gets to know the truth, and spycraft. And this starts to then draw the attention of other people. And those other people, to my surprise, were, I guess you could call occultists. And this is what I learned from this initial kind of work into the Anunnaki. So I go and I'm working in this kind of field, I guess, if you want to call it that, niche. And I'm trying to figure out, like, why is everybody so interested in, and I mean, I understand the Sumerians, they're a fascinating culture, but why is everybody so hung up on whether or not the Anunnaki are aliens? Like, what is going on with this? Why is this a thing?
Because the story sounds like it's aliens.
It sounds like it's aliens, but it also has like
here's my problem with it.
There's a lot of problems.
My big problem with this, and this goes with any history. I mean, you could talk about this with the Anunnaki, and you could talk about this with JFK. The problem with history is that people that write history books based on previous history books. Like, none of them go back to the original sources. And even the original sources are in a specific language that, like, you know, how many people actually dedicate their lives to actually translating that exact language? And then you extract the raw words, but those raw words don't translate to our meaning of those words. So there's so many fucking barriers of bullshit you got to get through. It's just like, it's so hard. That's why there's so many different flavors of Satanism, because everyone has a different, like Giorgiani has Prometheism, which is like a good thing. It's like the savior of humanity, which is also translated later to be Satan, which is an evil thing. Then you have like the carnival Satanists, like, you know, Anton LaVey and those people. So like, this is like my overall frustration with this whole topic.
I preach. We're in a church. You are preaching.
We are in a church.
Preaching to the choir. I love it. Absolutely correct. And then you get those, like Anton LaVey, cults of personality develop.
Yeah.
And then you'll get these like sycophantic people that will say it's either this or it's nothing. And so you find that most notably with the Zecharia Sitchin fans.
Right.
Now, so I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm not. I don't know. I don't really think that, you know, I don't really think that aliens are coming down in like 1960 style spaceships with the nuts and bolts and landing here and doing all this stuff. That just didn't work for me. But Sitchin wrote during a time where that was kind of, you know, in the cultural milieu after we supposedly went to the moon, right? So that
Allegedly.
was allegedly. So we were in that kind of mindset. He comes from that culture and he's writing about those things. So now it stays forever as though that's what the Anunnaki are, which, you know, I think is a suspicious thing altogether. So I start looking into it and I did what you said, which was go back to the original text, which now Sitchin and his ilk would say, well, nobody can read those. I can read those. Okay, this is true. There are many people who are skilled who go to school just for that. The late Dr. Michael Heiser was one of them. He had a website called sitchiniswrong.com. I'm like, okay, you're just like calling that out. But there are a lot of people who can read and do read these things originally. But at the same time, it's not like private information. You can go on and see the texts online.
Right.
You can go. There's Oxford has its own like dictionary of things. You can go research and do a little of your own work too, just to at least get some baseline idea. And you can consult with people and talk to people and try to at least get some sort of bearing. And so looking at that, even at like, so I would consider like Sitchin like a tertiary source because he's kind of still reading the secondary source because it's translation. So, so going back into that, I said, well, I'm disregarding that. I'm going to look at exactly what the Sumerians themselves said about those gods. It does sound like they came out of nowhere, right? And so there's that, and that captures the imagination. And there is what Samuel Noah Kramer, who is a legitimate Sumerologist, said was the Sumerian Problem. And the Sumerian Problem, which has still not been solved to this day, is how did this culture appear in like just 200 years? We went from like semi-settled hunter-gatherers to what we call civilization, and their language is called a language isolate. There's no known language that it's related to, and it just pops up out of nowhere. So it's like, what is that about, right? It's pretty interesting. And so looking into that, though, and you do see they left a ton of texts because history begins at Sumer was his book because it literally does. History is the written record. And so they were the ones who, as far as we know, invented writing. I say as far as we know because that we don't know what we're going to find at like Göbekli Tepe and things like that.
Right.
But in terms of having a huge corpus of literature, the cuneiform tablets have that because they were made on clay. And there's more cuneiform tablets than there are Egyptian papyri. There's so much. So there's a lot to be known about them, and a lot of it's been actually translated.
When was that like geometric stone that has like writing on every side of it?
The Rosetta Stone?
What is no, it's called like the King's List or something.
Oh, the Sumerian King's List.
That's what that is?
Yeah.
Where it's on like multiple sides?
Yes.
When was that one discovered?
Oh,
Do you know?
not off the top of my head the exact date, but it's stuff that's found in the 19th century, like mid 1800s.
And it's dated to
Probably about early 20th, so 19.
Okay.
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's it. So, but isn't it like one solid block that it has like writing on each side of it?
There is. Yes, that's why I thought you were talking about the Rosetta Stone.
Oh, okay. And anyway, it was in one of your essays that you did. There was an image of it, and it was interesting looking.
Oh, I think it's because there's many different ones. Are you talking about the one that's in an actual case?
Yes.
In a museum? Yes.
Yes.
So because that King's List has been repeated over and over again. So those are tablets, and then they had some that are posted that way.
Yeah, and the King's List basically explains that, like, you know, that these people were living for hundreds of thousands of years and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's like one of the mysteries of it is why do these people live so long or this sort of thing? And of course, and you know, if you don't know, you say aliens. But yeah, so what I found though when looking at some of those stories about those that came from above or what have you, and the story I'm sure you're familiar with the story, right? The idea is that something came to these Sumerians and then taught them agriculture and all of this, but also enslaved them, wanted to mine the atmosphere for gold, or wanted to mine our place for gold because they were losing it in their atmosphere. It's this entire like sci-fi story, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of did a more earthly analysis of it and looked at some of the stories that were the precursors to the basic like Old Testament Bible stories, like the Noah's Ark, for instance. And this is one of the reasons why the school system didn't necessarily focus a lot on the discoveries during the period between the 19th century, early 20th century, because it was when they were being found, it was during this period of a little bit of a transition, but also it was very Christian oriented. And so the archaeologists and people who found these just didn't think the public needed to know. So they didn't hide it per se, but they just didn't advertise it. They were just like, nah, we don't want to rock the world order. Let's just do our research and be done with it.
Let's hide the original sources.
Yeah, because what happens is when you follow those old stories, first of all, it puts the biblical stories back much further in time, and they are also very different. So the Noah's Ark story in particular paints a picture very vividly of an individual, a Noah-type figure who is adept at science and magic and sees signs in the sky that something's going to happen. And he does not build a boat, but instead he gathers, not his family either, but he finds all of the people from the civilization that were the most important scientists, what we would call scientists, so individuals who were good at all of the things that you would want if you were making a breakaway civilization. And then he gathered the animals of the steppe, not two male lions walking up the boat and like the nursery rhyme thing show. But the animals of the steppe. The animals of the steppe were important because these would have been the animals that, if you were a nomadic steppe tribe, you would have carried those animals with you for sustenance. They would have been something that you would want to bring them with you to make a caravan, a nomadic group of people who would say, like, we're going to leave what we think may be some sort of cataclysm, and we are going to get the animals of the steppe, and we're out of here. And everybody else, maybe you're going to stay, maybe you're going to go, whatever, come with us, but we're going to go and find dry land. And the reason for that is that on the Eurasian steppe, where this is proposed to have happened, if you bring ungulates with you, you are able to. It sounds sad,
What's
but
an ungulate?
So like animals that are grass eating, like maybe goats and cows and that sort of thing. So they could bring their sheep and goats with them, and when the times were tough and there's no food, you can bleed the animal and drink the blood and still keep the animal alive. And that was a way that people had create. Yeah. So sounds mean, but it's still something that some people practice today for that very reason. It's traditional, and that's what they could have done. Another thing
we used to
too.
do that with humans in antiquity, I heard. Did I read that on one of your essays?
I don't know, but
that people used to drink the blood of the warriors or something to get like their their warrior powers when they
I've
were dying?
not written about that, but I am very familiar with that.
read
And
that
yes,
somewhere
yes,
recently.
no, it's totally a thing. And yes, they did that because there's like these different hormones and things. And so
Right.
they thought, of course, they didn't know they were the hormones, but later when people try to propose that, hey,
Yeah.
maybe we should start doing
So
that.
if you were some leader in antiquity, some noble person, you could literally take some warrior, some young 20-year-old warrior guy. They would slash his throat and drink his blood. And they
The
think
young
that would
blood.
heal him.
Yeah. So what they would do with these animals is they would cut them and, drink their blood, but also use them for dairy. And so and then if you needed to, you could slaughter some, but then you also had basically, a sustainable thing going on where you have the animals that are going with you and they're going to make more of themselves. So it's a great plan instead of prepping with your storable foods and all of that.
Right.
You're like bringing like the living, factory with you. So the idea is that it was essentially a breakaway civilization. It traces along the lines of now just sort of magically, it seems, or coincidentally, to the Younger Dryas impact event. So where the theory then is that event happened and it caused great displacement of people because of rapid climate change events and a lot of these floods and things. And so people would have thought the whole world's flooding or, those stories kind of track. And then these individuals who made their breakaway civilization, who bring the animals of the steppe, who also would have been larger in stature because they're having animal protein, they then encounter, they go to Mesopotamia and they encounter the individuals who are there, who are semi-settled hunter-gatherers with a culture, not a civilization. And their height would have been different. Their stature was different. They appeared differently, which then explains why the Sumerian texts say the perspective of they are the black-headed ones, or the Adama, meaning the red clay people. So now, when you see this in Abrahamic religions, you'll see it be described as like, well, God made Adam from the clay of the earth, and he made like a person. When you read it maybe from a more anthropological perspective, and you look at the archaeological evidence, you see that there are individual bodies that were excavated in the region that were, first of all, the size. They're smaller in stature. They're not getting the same animal protein. They're just, what you'd expect from the people.
In what part specifically?
In what would have been modern day Iraq.
Got it.
Yeah. So you have then people who are roughly about 5'2", smaller, and their remains were painted red using the specific red clay from that region. They were like a red ochre. And so it wouldn't be unreasonable to then make that leap to say, well, we do observe people currently who do that. That's a very common practice, is using different mud or ochre or things to paint the body. And so if you kind of look at it from that perspective, a more earthly one, as opposed to like, bleep, blop, bloop, they're coming from space and they're here to get us. You see that it kind of paints a picture of individuals who do not have dark hair. And this is where it gets to be like, oh, maybe they're the Nordics and all that.
Don't have dark hair.
They don't because, or at least not black hair, because they described themselves as the black-headed ones. And they were speaking on behalf of the gods in the writing when they say this is what they thought. They made that differentiator of, we are the black-headed ones. So that right there says, well, if they have black hair and they do, why would you pull that out as a difference? And then you have the blue eye condition. Again, I know this gets to be all like, Georgiani's Nordics and this sort of thing, but hey, shout out to Jason. But the thing is, it's, there are these little like tells, like they had all of their Sumerian statues that were divine have blue eyes. And that was something that people thought was cursed. The blue eye to this day, the evil eye, right? It's a blue eye.
We have actual Sumerian statues with blue eyes?
Yes, lapis lazuli. Some of them don't have the eyes anymore because they were plucked out and stolen. But yeah, they were very big on lapis. And
Can you pull a picture of these up? I don't think I've ever seen this.
Yeah, so it's so there's this, it seems like the story of a clash of different people coming together. And if you take this just hypothesis, we'll say, where there are these individuals who they don't have dark hair, but the people on the ground call them, there's one,
Whoa.
the lapis lazuli.
What is that made out of?
Lapis lazuli is a blue rock.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I should have brought that for you today.
That's incredible looking.
I have a cuneiform cylinder seal made of that.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yep.
And these date back to the Sumerians.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Sumerians.
That's amazing they survived that long.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We have a lot of interesting things left from them, which is also why a lot of people will pick this up and say, I feel like I've not learned enough about them. What's going on? And back when I had my class, I used to ask the kids, 20-somethings. I was like, how many have heard of the Egyptians? Of course. How many have heard of the Sumerians? A few. Mostly because of shows like Ancient Aliens or podcasts. But then, of course, that comes with the whole... And here's what I know about them, but then it's like this whole Sitchin narrative.
Right.
And it's like, okay. So, but there's a lot to be known about the Sumerians and their gods, and it's just not, I think, put out there well. So that was something that, I'm looking at this story and I'm like, it sounds very human. They were also called the Shining Ones. So were they shining? Because now this comes to your point, a very good point about how do we know? Like when you translate something, it's like if I were to say, Danny's so cool, and I wrote that down, and later they're like, well, clearly Danny's body temperature has to be, fairly low in comparison to. It's like you don't even know what I'm saying,
Yep.
So we have so many problems with translation or interpretation. So that's just an element of doubt right there. But if you do look at what seemed to be going on, you have these individuals. They come over. They're called the Shining Ones. Some people have said it's because they were like Gnostic, because they were serpent-like. Because they had, all these features, they were very smart. Some people said it's because they mastered metallurgy already. So, it could very well be if you were a person who lived and you were, used to your semi-settled hunter-gathering lifestyle, and you saw a caravan of individuals who looked different, like nobody you've ever seen before, and they're wearing perhaps something shiny. You might just stop and go, wow. Now, what do we know from history, like really, when that happens? Okay, colonization. It never ends well for those like people that the people kind of meet. And I know that's,
Right.
people are tired of hearing about like colonizers and stuff, and I get it. But this is like a legit thing that happens, and we can't deny that if somebody comes in and they're like a little more powerful or have an advantage, they're going to be like, hey, why don't you work for me?
Yep.
That's what ends up happening. And that's why I think that the Sumerian, like understanding that point of our history and the Sumerians is probably the single most important thing we should be looking at historically. Sounds like an overstatement, but it's like, hear me out, because this is the part where it all begins. It all begins there, that we know, of course, and it all begins as in civilization, economic influence, and control, and the priest class. So if you are a group of people and you see these other people and you're like, we want this land, we're going to make this land ours. But these are good worker people. So what can we do? Well, you can't communicate, but you can intimidate. You can kind of cargo cult them. Like, look, we know magic. We know about, and in fact, we're going to plant this here and watch it grow. And they can start now having that, what we see always with these cultures, like, you do what I say because there's an eclipse coming, guys. You don't want anything bad to happen. So it's that power. But then in order to do that, though, you have to have a mediator. And that mediator is the priest class. That is the class of individuals who can read and write and communicate. And they go in between the two. And that's important because you don't want to go in like, these people are going to take over, and you say, look at these lovely hunter-gatherer types. I think we'll train them and make them part. No, you'd say, okay, knowledge is power. We need to have an intermediary, and we're going to subjugate them. And that's clearly what the Sumerian texts even say. They said they were enslaved. They said they weren't treated well. And when you see the accounts of these gods, I mean, it's not like you'd want to have a what would Jesus do bracelet of these gods in the ancient days, right? What would Zeus do? I mean, because the answer's not great. He's going to be raping and eating people. It's just really ugly. Right. And so that's what they were tending to do, though, very human-like things. Then we get the very beginnings of ideas of worship. And the word of it actually meant to work for. So if you remove some of the context, and this is why I think it's so important to push back even further than say the ancient Greeks or the ancient Egyptians or anything, is to say where were some of the seeds of this civilization here. And what they were doing was they have actual recipes. I mean, like books of how to prepare your sacrifice. The gods didn't want them boiled. They wanted them roasted over an open flame. They liked the smell of it. It made them kind of come to it. They had a whole set of guidelines of who could breed with whom. So the idea of like, did the Anunnaki, manipulate the human genome? And yeah, they did. They very much did. Did they do it with like Mr. Wizard's World style beakers and things? No, they didn't. They did it through good old fashioned animal husbandry. They had eugenics back then and told us who we could breed with and who we couldn't.
Let's talk about the most underrated organ in your body, the liver. It's doing 500 plus functions a day, from energy to fat metabolism to digestion and vitamin storage. Basically processing everything you put into your body. And when it's overworked, you feel it. And that's why I've been using Dose for your liver. It's a clinically backed liver health supplement. But what I like is it's not another pill or powder. It's a daily 2-ounce liquid shot, and it honestly tastes like fresh squeezed orange juice. No sugar, no junk, and no calories. Dose is designed to help cleanse your liver of unwanted stressors that can slow it down and support daily liver function so it can do its job. And when you take it consistently, you're supporting steadier energy, better digestion, and fewer of those random midday crashes. And what really stood out to me was the science behind it. 2 double-blind placebo-controlled trials that showed a positive impact on liver enzymes. Ready to give your liver the support it deserves? Head on over to dosedaily.co/Danny or enter DANNY at checkout to get 35% off your first subscription. Your body does so much for you. It's time for you to do something for it. That's dosedaily.co/Danny for 35% off your first month subscription.
Yeah, it's funny because there's so many parallels between the Sumerians, the Greeks, even the Mayan cultures, like with these different figures and these different stories, like the flood myth and all that stuff. And it's interesting how like all of that was pushed to the side and sort of buried. And then when the church came about, and then, try to just destroy the knowledge base of, antiquity and therefore, everything else. And it's just interesting once you learn those parallels and you see like, how does this make sense? Like if this guy, Yahweh, wanted to flood the earth, why the hell would he get Noah to go save everybody? Like he just tried to destroy humanity. Why is he getting somebody to save him? Well, you've learned that that's not actually the real story.
Right.
Like it was in Sumeria, it was Enki, I believe. And then in Greek, it was Prometheus, who like created humanity and then actually tried to save humanity by going against Zeus. And it's just like, and then I think it's Quetzalcoatl in the Mayan story.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just fascinating how like it's just changed and it makes no fucking sense in the Bible.
No sense at all, because it's a Bible is not a book. It is a collection of books that, it's a library. So it has to be read as such, not in a linear way.
Yeah.
So that is, so you mentioned Enki, and that's kind of an important component to this because he is a Promethean figure. So in that sense, it was like Enlil would have been like the equivalent to say like a Yahweh, like a storm god, a desert storm god that, but the edict was these Anunnaki, the pantheon, the original 12, they were not allowed to breed with the people because they were considered they're animals.
Right.
They were the part of the farm. They were domesticating them. They were making them work for. They were doing these things. So they taught them agriculture, but only in the service of them. Of course, they got some, just like, cash crops and all of this whole system of an economic system of saying, okay, you're going to have the benefits of a civilization. Okay, we're going to protect you from the animals. We're going to protect you. We're going to have law, legalism, and professions even. They created the idea of a profession. So the Sumerians were known for, all of these different inventions. But are they, it's good, but at the same time, it's like the trappings of civilization. So they taught the priest class how to be an intermediary. They weren't allowed to then go up to this temple. The priest had to do it. So there was this like gap between the regular folks and these new gods or these living gods. Now, something, though, that I find to be a little, maybe I would say supernatural, because I don't throw the whole idea out completely. I mean, because there are some strange things, but I think a lot of the people pushing this Anunnaki agenda, if you will, get wrong is that when you Google Anunnaki, often you'll find these images of these winged beings with like bird faces and things like that. And those are not technically Anunnaki. So Anunnaki is a word kind of like Baal, kind of like Lord. It means princely blood. It means of this certain offspring. So as a result of that, there's like 40 plus Anunnaki, but most of the time we focus on like the 12 pantheon or whatever. And so the word gets thrown around a lot. But the Apkallu are the other beings that sort of, they're like literally referred to as semi-biological entities in the Sumerian texts. And they're the ones that look different. Semi-biological. So it's like they are described as coming from the ocean, maybe materializing both in the real world, but then not. They're very specter-like or sort of dense, not dense, which is, you don't see that explained with the Anunnaki. They're very much like individuals. They have effects on the world. They, make crops, they make rules, they do all these things. But then you have these Apkallu. And when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, well, what are these things? And it's very old. And on that Sumerian kings list, there's the writing that will say like, this is the king, and yeah, they live forever, but like also a sage was assigned to them. Like, and then eventually that kind of dissipates, but there's this old tradition where it was like this idea that you had a sage, and the sage was the Apkallu, the 7 sages, and those were associated with the 7 Pleiades. So it was a celestialized concept. And it kind of is, I would say, like a prototype of a genie or a daemon or something to that effect, where these kings had advisors, but these advisors were like channeled, and they were accessed through altered states. And that's what led me to the recent book I did on the altered states of the Sumerians, because they actually have evidence of them being very much involved in that activity, even though not a lot of attention is given. For instance, there's Sumerian cuneiform tablets called mushroom tablets, and they're literally shaped like mushrooms. And they have cuneiform going all the way around them. And most of the time, so when you say tablet, you can think of like, you find like, maybe like people will think of Moses in the old movie holding up these great big tablets. Tablets are very small. They can be very small. That's why you can like take so many in a looting. So sometimes people take bags or out of them, or like just tons of these little tablets. So they can vary in size, but also tablet would indicate like the shape of something like that you would write on that way. So it's surprising sometimes to people that they actually had these shaped tablets. They were molded from clay to look like mushrooms. So some of these, some of them are more mushroom-like than others. Some of those are.
What are you calling them, Steve? Mesopotamian foundation cones?
Yeah, that's what the Google said.
Yeah.
Maybe I can type in like mushroom.
Yeah, I would
that
say
one
mushroom.
certainly looks like a mushroom. The Sumerian cuneiform, that one in the middle on Etsy.
So because in Sumer, and then the civilization lasted a very long time. So they ended up becoming these, what would be called foundation. Yeah. So they ended up getting conical.
Wow, that's wild.
But there are in the Berlin Museum, though, there's a better examples of them looking a little more mushroom-like insofar as they're not as conical. And so I have some examples of those in the book. And those, now the function of both of these is important because
that's crazy. Look at that one on the top right, Steve.
What is wild about it is so they undergo some changes because the Sumerian culture did. They went in. I mean, it wasn't like a monolith. It was thousands of years from like Sumer to Akkadian, Babylonian, etc. And so they kept cuneiform, so it looks as though it's like the same, but it's not. And you can see in the cuneiform it gets like proto cuneiform has some symbols with it that and then it goes differently. But it kind of is easy to think of these things as being all from Sumer, and that's to the point of the Apkallu not looking like the Anunnaki and vice versa.
Right.
So these mushroom tablets, though, and why they were like for the foundation, they were placed into the foundations of buildings like temple structures, and around them would be prayers and hopes and things. So you would have this consecrated, and then you would put this message into the temple. And similar to how some people, when they go to the Wailing Wall, will put a little script or a prayer into that wall. So that's a very ancient tradition. But what they did was they took these tablets, these mushroom-shaped ones, and they would plug them into the Sumerian temple walls. Now, if you just kind of, when you take that and other evidence of what they were doing in terms of their recipes, some of their medicines.
What do we know about the medicines and the drugs they were using?
In terms of the medicine, it's very well developed. There's
medicine and drugs, at least in Greek, there was no difference.
No difference here either. In fact, the line is so blurred because they mix it up with the priests, like an exorcists. So if in this case, in that time, you had the priest was the physician, so they didn't differentiate between body and mind, and so they didn't have that clinical sense, although they did have interesting clinical features like malpractice insurance. So that's where we get like an eye for an eye, because if you were performing like cataracts removal, the official law said if you did it in the wrong eye or did something, you're going to have to be blinded in one of yours. So that was so they didn't mess around. So, and they were doing advanced techniques. They invented pills. So back then, like 5,000-6,000 years ago, they had pills. Yeah. So they were looking at this as not like a body-mind split. So what they did was they would have the priest, and the priest would come to your home and to perform an exorcism. And what's interesting about that is it's very similar to the exorcisms that you would see in films now. So there's over 600 medical texts in the British Museum alone that describe all of the different incantations and recipes for all of these different medicines and plants that they were using. And so they would have, essentially the priest would come and they would look at a person who maybe was like running a fever, or they were using some sort of profanity, or they did something wrong, and they would have to go and badger that patient for the name of the demon. Very similar to what exorcists are shown to do, like, what demon, what is your name?
Right, like Bob Larson does.
Yes, exactly. So you would do that in order to find out like a diagnostic sense of, okay, so now you have this demon in you. We know that this demon responds to this medicine, or perhaps the pouring of a libation, like beer. Beer was a big one. So put out a beer, put out some whatever, and pray over the body for so long and try to give that exorcism. So similar things that people do now for exorcisms.
Very interesting, the power of belief. When somebody believes something is very real and you give them drugs, it seems like there's like something that happens. Like you give somebody who doesn't believe in something a drug, and then somebody who does believe something a drug, the same drug. Like if they really believe they're going to turn into a zombie and be controlled by like a voodoo sorcerer, like that will actually happen to them.
Yeah. And
even with the stuff like with Bob Larson, these exorcists doing these big presentations or these big like conferences where people he's pulling the devil out of people, and they're like talking like saying all this crazy shit. Like this person really believes the devil is inside her, and it's like compelling her to like do this and talk like this. What is that?
Yeah. That's it's very powerful, and to watch it is it makes you wonder too about what actually a demon is. And that's a way that I've approached a lot of the work, is like when it came to stargates, for instance, when people are like, is there a stargate? Is there a stargate? I'm like, well, first of all, what is a stargate? Because if you imagine Stargate SG-1 and there's some big like apparatus in the desert, probably not. But what is a stargate? What are these things? And I think that's an important thing to start questioning, or what are these terms? Because Hollywood has given us a whole view of the ancient world that maybe isn't true. Like the pyramids being, not in crumbles, but of course being polished white limestone with gold caps, or, a lot of the films that show ancient Greece already being in ruins, when really all of those Greek statues were painted vividly, almost garishly. So, and so have you seen those painting, what the statues in Greece looked like when they were painted? I'm not sure. Oh, there's something. Yeah, there's great examples. So now if you look at
you're saying they were painted over later?
No, they were painted.
Originally they were painted.
So when you imagine like the quintessential like ancient Greek world, you see like statues of white, and the columns are white, and everything's just sort of, but the whole thing was painted.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
There you go. Yeah, that's how they looked originally.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, really, that one makes Caesar look a little like Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Little less impressive when he's painted like that, but yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the real.
That's bizarre.
If you were put in a time machine and sent back to ancient Greece, that's what it'd look like. Not like Ray Harryhausen's Clash of the Titans, where it was already in ruin. Although that was fun, but that's the kind of subtle influence, though, very important but subtle influence that Hollywood has had. So because of that, we have kind of an idea already of what was going on back then, but we don't. So in the sense of these mushroom tablets and all of these different things that they were doing, they were pretty advanced in their knowledge of plant medicine and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they were really into the poppy. So that was something that I if you look at the little rosettes that are often on this ancient art, this motif of the Anunnaki and so on, it looks like, well, just little flowers or something like that. And people have chalked it off as just, they're just like ornamental or whatever. Yeah.
These things?
Some of those are actual rosettes. Those are my Greek ones, specifically the Sumerian or
She's talking about
Mesopotamian.
Sumerian.
Yeah. If you look at that, yeah, so those
like the
so-called
watches?
wristwatches of the gods. Now there's the rosettes on the nails, because what they were depicting there was the poppy.
Oh, really?
And when what they're holding too, there's some of those like the Anunnaki statues. If you look at like the Anunnaki, so now this is interesting because see this wristwatch of the gods thing that a lot of people talk about. I've actually found the real wristwatches. I have them up on my Substack or somewhere. But they're gold, they're beautiful, and they're not watches, but
the actual ones that were used in Sumeria.
Yeah, and they're beautiful. So the reason that they were sort of not on display is because of the looting. So in so there was a great excavation.
And they were just decorative, that's all?
They were decorative, but they had an important decorative motif on them that included these apkallu doing what appeared to be something called the Hulgil rite, which was the anointing of the king. So back to that 7 sages thing, like this indicated that they were using perhaps opium and other things to commune with these entities.
Right.
The Sumerian mushroom tablets that they had, they were identifying the mushroom as a conduit, as a mediator to the gods. This was over and over again. They were very much into altered states. Right. Their beer was different than the beer that we have now. They had drinking songs, and they really were just about being in an altered state in very many ways.
Wow.
And so these wristwatches, they so-called, they're just cuffs, but they're gorgeous and they're beyond what anyone thought was capable at the time of people making. They have gold and lapis and very intricate design.
And it symbolized the poppy.
They symbolized the poppy. In the middle of it was the blue eye. So like the Nazir sort of thing, there was the blue eye. And around it is this motif of this little like apkallu thing. And he's anointing. It's the pine cone and the handbag. And so that was what the king or queen got to wear after they were, I guess, anointed. We don't know. So, but this was all found in the queen's tomb at Nimrud. And that was found by an Iraqi archaeologist, Professor Hussein, who stumbled upon the remnants of what the British
name.
he stumbled upon the remnants of what was left after a Western excavation, and he thought, so I think there's something else here. Sure enough, he located the second largest gold hoard to King Tut's tomb. Tons of gold, beautiful gold, whole headdresses, these cuffs, lots of like, almost look like table scatter, but they were like little flowers, these poppies. And I say they're poppies because he said they were poppies. So he puts out this book where what he did was he cataloged everything and he published the book in English and in Arabic. And he's a legitimate professor. He had a whole team. He was working for the museum. So he's doing this work. And then the war happens and the looting happened. And all of that was lost. Most of it was lost.
Jeez.
And you can only imagine where it went or what happened to it. And the professor was lost as well. There we go. There's a good version of it there.
Beautiful. Now, why do people try to connect the pine cone with the pineal gland?
I think because it looks like it.
Some people say it looks like an artichoke too.
Yeah. I think it's just I think it's simply because it looks like it.
Yeah.
Like the kidney beans weren't allowed to be eaten by the Pythagoreans.
And what was the
'Cause they look like
significance of it?
The pine cone?
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the significance. I think it's
because
changed.
it was the pine cone in the handbag, right? You said.
Yeah, well, in that particular culture, it was the anointing and the use of it to cultivate the latex from the opium poppy.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was, or sometimes fertility. They would use it to help fertilize the plants because, again, very agricultural in nature. So they're using all of these different medical plants and things, and they use the poppy. And the poppy was used not just for pain relief, but they were apparently mixing it with something else. But it was called the joy plant.
Right.
And so they knew its effects, and they knew that it was revered. And this professor, who also disappeared, he was last seen in Mosul.
Hussein?
Yeah. He we don't know what happened to him. There's very little evidence that the last correspondence was that something wasn't going right and that he had to hide out in Mosul. So there is a book, though, that is at the University of Chicago that has a lot of these images and things. And so it catalogs it, but most importantly, when he's describing these, he's describing them as poppy. As a matter of fact, like, of course it's poppy, and this is what we know. Whereas over time, we ended up calling it something else. Like, it was originally agreed that it was the poppy, because you see that in the ancient or the earlier works where, our archaeologists at the time or Sumerologists were like, okay, this is a poppy.
Right.
And then you see those references now not only like disregarded, but they'll just say they're flowers or florets or common motif, or sometimes pomegranates, which if you see they're holding a stalk with these like bulbs on them, they're not pomegranates, they're too small, but they're identical to the opium poppy. And it's probably because they don't want to reinforce the idea of drug use, but.
Right. Well, then you have the Eleusinian mysteries that were happening in ancient Greece, where there was these rituals that involved drugs, sex, only the wealthy people went because they had to bring like offerings,
Tributes.
they had to bring like animals or whatever to sacrifice, and I think it was for like a week or something that they would do those rituals, and that happened for a long, 1,000 years that was happening in Eleusis. It's crazy.
It's crazy, but it's kind of the typical way that humans kind of operate. It's just now we're under this illusion that we're all just buttoned up with a suit on, and we're not doing that anymore. But if you think about some of the wild stuff the Nazis were into. And at the time, if you were, an educated person in Berlin, and you looked at these guys in their Hugo Boss uniforms, thinking, oh, they look pretty spiffy, and they're bringing me great economic value, and I think I'm onto this, you would not for a minute think, yeah, and then there's Himmler in a castle, like all dressed like some kind of druid doing some sacrifice. Or you wouldn't think all of that because you'd be like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So, nowadays it's easy to think, you look at our political leaders now and they're wearing their suits and ties, and you would think they're not at eyes wide shut parties, are they? It's like, and now we're kind of thinking differently. But so there's always been this underlying strangeness, if you will. And that's the occult.
I don't know if like things like, I don't know. I have no clue if that kind of stuff was forbidden like that back then in antiquity, right? Would they look at that like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? I'm going to go get high as fuck and have an orgy. Like maybe that wasn't frowned upon. I don't know. It
depends on the time and the culture, but in a lot of cases it wasn't, and it was just different the way that it was, or it was regulated in such a way. Like in the Sumerian example, you have temple prostitution, and it's hard to like make that sacred because you just think of a street hoe. Like, how is that? How is a regular old like corner like something sacred in it? Well, it's because we're implanting our view of what that is retroactively. At the time, though, it's something completely different. It was this idea that you had this female who could essentially become possessed. So then you could go have sex with the god. You could commune with the god.
Right.
And so she would live at the temple, not forever. They would take girls sometimes like 12, 13, and then they would Now, this would happen throughout different cultures in some way or shape or form too. So this isn't a one-off. This is another one of those examples of like, springs up in a lot of different cultures over different times. But in the Sumerian context, it would be, there was a girl, she would be taken or sold, however, to be in this position of the temple priestess.
At the age of 12.
Sometimes, I mean, it's hard to, if you can bleed, you can breed kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, like different thinking. So definitely tragic and terrible, but they would take the kid and have them learn the arts of making a man happy. And they were not themselves, though. And this is part of the excuse. It wasn't like this is your child anymore. This isn't a girl. This is now a vessel. This is an avatar. And so she would go and stay at this temple. And these temples were on the riverbank. And so what you'd have is the farmers who were, getting their grains. They would get on a boat and they would go up the current of the river. And they would stop at the temple. They would go into the temple and bring their portion, like the tax, essentially, what it was that they were having to give to these leaders of grain. And they, in exchange, got a token. This is where money comes from, though. So the token had an image of grain and the goddess on it. The token wasn't meant to buy things. There was no free market. It was just, we're getting this token. Meant you get one free ride with the mistress upstairs.
Wow.
So now what you get for that is it wasn't just sex, because maybe you had a wife at home, right? You're not there for the sex. You're there for communing with God, because she was the thing now that brought God. And so this was a holy, sacred event that you would go up there, here's your token, and you were going to experience God. And then you'd be like, so that's the currency of trade. This is why, money, sex, power.
That's the first documented case of like actual exchange of money.
Of token, of coinage.
And
that
this
way.
was in, when was this roughly?
I guess. So this is older than that ancient Greek. This is in Sumer. Yeah.
Oh, in Sumer.
Oh, yeah. That's why I focus on that a lot, is because, these are great. But then when you go to, it would have been like an old shekel. If you look up a shekel, we're talking thousands of years before Greece, and they were doing very similar things. And it gets, no pun intended, but buried. But it's in a lot of ways, in my view, because that was where the ruling elite concept even began, that we know of. Who knows, right? But what we have from the historical record is a very, very detailed account of how to be administrators, how to rule over individual people in your society as though they are part of your farming operation, as though they're literal cattle.
Right.
This is I think a very important distinction, because when you look at egalitarian societies generally that come together from like tribal unions, or you have all these different ways of ruling, but when civilization, as described in an academic sense, having sciences, having laws, having all of these different things, making art, whatever, when you have civilization come together, you have all these strange features too of the money, the power, I don't want to say it's a disease, because, we're living in a civilization. I don't think I'd want to like run off like the Bohemians did in the German woods, take off all my clothes and try to live there and see what happens over the winter. I like civilization. However, you can still acknowledge that there was a great change going on at the time, where it changed in an effort to collect power and use the people at the bottom of the pyramid, literally the step pyramid, as a resource for you. You didn't kill those people.
Right.
You enslaved them, and you used them as a resource, both physically for their labor and then also sometimes spiritually, at least in your like religious viewpoints. You would harness things from them, their energy, their power. And so, to do that, you had to put yourself at the top of a pyramid, and then you had to have the intermediaries, that priest class, the middleman. And that relied upon you not knowing how the sausage was made. If you were illiterate, if you didn't know, the guy behind the curtain, that's how it was. It was all about knowledge being power, which is why back to Enki, those figures, Enki was that Promethean figure, because Enki felt bad for how these like humans were being treated and came down and gave the wisdom of Enki. That was a thing. So the thing was, I'm going to give you the wisdom of Enki.
And his brother was Noah, right?
Enlil.
Well, I mean, in like his Deucalion was Enki's brother, or no, not brother, son. Deucalion, wasn't that Enki's son? And then he was like the Noah figure that is in the Bible, who gets the boat and like brings everybody on the boat and goes around.
Atrahasis, I think,
tries to restart civilization.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Okay.
So you have then Enlil is like the Yahweh type figure,
Right.
And then you have the Enki. An Enki figure is kind of Promethean and does this whole thing, but then that's where the division happens, and this is where you enter like Nephilim talk, because then once those gods start breeding with the non-gods, then it dilutes the gene pool. So it was kind of laying out this idea of like eugenics early, like we're going to keep it here in the family, like this breakaway civilization, we're going to keep it royal bloodlines intact, right. And then it merged. And so later you see that isn't how it happens anymore. Of course, it was just like we go into different invading people come in and the whole culture develops differently. But in those very early years, it appears to be the meeting of two different cultures, one who took over the other and instituted what they were used to from before perhaps the Younger Dryas, which was an advanced civilization, maybe not spaceships advanced, but advanced in the sense that they had arts and sciences and the ability to understand hierarchical rule. And so they basically, when they made a breakaway civilization, they civilized the people there. And so you see, and that's what you see though, when they reference that 200 years, like how did people go from this to that? Well, they went from, hunter-gathering to buildings, a whole like system of being, very litigious, very degree oriented.
They merged with this other civilization. The
other civilization kind of took them over,
right.
Used them as like cattle.
Yeah.
And then eventually, everybody assimilated into that. So, but I think the important takeaway, and I really do think that this is part of the reason that they're, I don't know, maybe it's just my conspiracy theory, hat going full time, but like I got to put on the tinfoil hat for this. But I just feel like there has been an effort to keep people ignorant to things like economic history, like the Sumerians, like mathematics, because the one of the big things that the Sumerians and later Babylonians, of course, that whole group of people were known for was their advanced mathematics. And we wouldn't necessarily think that. So advanced that there have been researchers in peer-reviewed journals that, were working really hard to try to crack a case on a geometry problem that even his grad students couldn't help with. And he ends up spending a lot of time, I think over like 14 years, he was digging around the British Museum until finally there was like a tablet there. And he's looking at it and he's like, well, holy shit, they figured it out. And it was like the answer was right in front of him. And you see this happen a lot where people will go back to those cuneiform tablets to try to help them figure out math problems now, even while we have like computers and AI and things.
Yeah.
The level of mathematic knowledge that they had was astounding. So it's like, well, what would that have to do with why are they hiding that? Well, remember the name of the game, if you're on the top of the pyramid, is to keep those at the bottom ignorant so that you can stay on top of that pyramid. And that's done through, essentially illiteracy and
right.
Which also is like, you can't read numbers. So numerical illiteracy and things like that. So I think that's... looking at the model, the Sumerian model, you just start to see all of that kind of come up.
Well, that's the funny saying is numbers don't lie, but words do.
Yeah, that's very well said.
Because language is like the written word, and stories are inherently, it's deceptive. It's like, it's a tool of deception. Completely.
And so then math could be the truth. That's what the Pythagoreans thought, was that the only thing real was the number.
Yeah.
And so that was like a whole, cult in and of itself. And that's been, I think kind of going back though to the idea of like, well, why, like, how did this all come about? Like going into the occult and all of this, it was essentially that these subjects I found over time drew the attention of people in positions of power. And I thought, that's funny. So, I mean, I can imagine you get emails like this, though, too, given your subject matter, where you'll get emails from people who claim this or say they want to connect for this reason or that reason. And so So sometimes, though, I got some emails, and this was early on, like 10 years ago, where somebody'd say something interesting, or you should read this book or read that book, sure. And then I'd get interesting pictures, like, can you tell me what this tablet says, or can you point me in a direction? Sometimes I would see these pictures a couple times, and it would be high def, and it would be in somebody's house, like in a full-on museum case, but you can see this is like a palatial estate somewhere in the Middle East. Like, oh, you have these in your private collection.
Wow.
Okay. I don't know, sure. But then I noticed that some people would start to reach out to me, offering to take me to Iraq to look for different things. They were wrapped up with a lot of different, like we mentioned Jason Giorgiani. I know he came on here and discussed somebody called the Londoner. You don't know if you remember him discussing
I don't remember
that.
this.
So
He's been on at least 3 times.
Yeah. So one of the times he was on, I think that was the first time I even saw the show or heard. I heard him talking about the Londoner, and I had like a record skip moment because I was like, I know that guy. I reached out to Jason. I was like, Jason, I think this is the Londoner. He's like, I think we should talk. The Londoner.
Remind me what it's all about.
So that one, it's a whole thing that I think the person who best describes that situation is Professor Benjamin Teitelbaum. And I'm sure everybody's probably tired of me like promoting Ben's book, but Ben wrote one of the best books to kind of, I think, break through the normies and like get people to understand that like there's an occult issue here in our contemporary period. And that book is called Bannon's War for Eternity.
Steve Bannon?
Exactly. So I'm like, okay, hear me out, people. I know it's a book about sloppy Steve, and it's kind of like passé, and we're bored with all this stuff.
He's a very interesting character.
He is a very interesting character, and Ben did a very good job. He's a ethnomusicologist.
What is the name of this again? I'm sorry.
It's Benjamin Teitelbaum, and I don't know. I'm sorry, Ben, if it's Teitelbaum or Teitelbaum. Sorry about that. But it's the book is called Bannon's War for Eternity. So definitely recommend that book. That will get into filling in a lot of the gaps. But essentially, that book basically shines a light on the darker side. If anyone needed a darker side to some of those people, but we'll say the darker side as in the occult side. Because it may come as a surprise that these individuals are often involved in maybe ritual magic, or at least they have an interest in it. They have connections to those things.
I can see him in a robe doing a seance.
Right. With the disheveled hair, yeah. So he's that was something where I started piecing together, why is everybody so interested? And I say everybody. Okay, curse of knowledge. Not everybody, but why are there very particular people who have an interest in geopolitics and all of these topics, yet they're interested in Anunnaki bloodlines? That seems kind of crazy. And of course, once you get to a point where you have a lot of money, sometimes you have too much money and time on your hands, and so you can get a little crazy. But if you're rich, you're eccentric. If you're poor, you're crazy. So they're eccentric now. But I noticed that, and it just got me more and more interested because, as I said, initially I was studying Western esotericism, but and some of the work of like Wouter Hanegraaff in Amsterdam and that with my master's, and my advisors were sort of like, how about we just do something a little, and I'm like, I just want the paper, let's just go. But I put a little bit.
Pump the brakes, lady.
Right? That was exactly what it was. And I'm like, I'm not fighting this. I'm just getting through it. So, but I took like the relevant angle and just sort of focused on the economic history component of it. But my interest was always in occulted knowledge, rejected knowledge in that sense. Like, why does some information get to stay in our corpus or our canon, and how come some doesn't? Who gets to make that decision? As we know now, Robert Maxwell does, or did. Like, that was a big part of it, which is like...
That's a crazy story.
That's crazy.
Why do you call it Pergamon Press? The throne of Satan.
Yeah. Who knows, right? It's like words just don't have any meaning or power. Symbols, right? I mean, we live in a world of symbols, and it's just like what they say, hidden in plain sight. So... and that doesn't mean, of course, everything's nefarious, but it just does mean that things are inspired by. People are inspired. And the word inspire comes from the Latin inspirare, and it means specifically when a deity blows life into you, breathes into you. And so for you to be, it's like expire or respire. So if you're inspired by something, then you're just, that thing, whatever it was, just
Impregnated you.
Yeah, pretty much. And so, that tells a lot about a person, like what maybe they name their companies or what they name any of that. So, yeah. So the question of like, well, why does some information get to be out there and other information doesn't? So I just started like pulling at that thread for a long time and realized that, wow, okay. So I think this whole Anunnaki question is a little more serious than I had originally thought. I think it has more to do with the quest for legitimizing bloodlines and the notion of blood and soil and the notion of who gets the divine right to rule. And it has more to do with that level of, say, occulted curiosity or what have you than it really does about anything interesting archaeologically. And but those people who may have those alternative interests, they also have the money and the power to donate or have foundations and trickle that through. And so that's why not everybody who's out there searching or doing this kind of work has anything to do with that. But you have to look at sometimes the motivations of the people who may be at the top. I
find it so interesting that Bannon, as rich as he is, still does a daily like talk show that no one watches. That guy started Seinfeld.
Yeah.
He gets Seinfeld checks every month. Like he was one of the people who did the deal for Seinfeld. Like, why are you? He's just bizarre. And some of the stuff that he was involved in, like with the early banking stuff and the people that he was wrapped up with, like very early on before he met Epstein, it's just very weird.
It is weird.
It's a rat's nest of intertwining people and stories, and
it is really wild. But I think and like I said, I recommend the book for anyone to get an idea of that. And it also speaks to then some of the stuff Jason has experienced, and so we'll let that rat's nest be there. But but it covers that. But that's just an example, a little bit of how sometimes people reach out to me with leads or different things,
right.
And I thought, it just made me want to know more about like why are these things hidden and what's going on, and so that kind of put me in that direction. I think of the occult factor in all of it, and occult just meaning hidden.
Have you ever left your doctor's appointment feeling like you've learned absolutely nothing? Like, you're fine, drink more water, and we'll see you next year. No real data, no actual plan, just a shrug and a handshake. And that is the reason why I love what Superpower is doing. It's a much more proactive way to understand what's going on inside your body. Superpower sends a licensed professional to your home, or you can visit a nearby lab, and within one simple blood draw, they measure 100 plus biomarkers. Then everything shows up in the app: heart, liver, thyroid, hormones, metabolism, vitamins, minerals, and even environmental elements. So you can finally stop doing guesswork and know exactly what your body needs. And what's really interesting is it's not just a one-time snapshot. Superpower tracks your results over time, showing your biological age. It helps you understand long-term trends and gives you a more actionable plan based on your data. You can even upload past lab results and keep everything in one place. And if questions ever come up, they've got their own on-demand care team inside the platform, so you're not left trying to figure out random numbers at 11 p.m. Make this year the year you finally stop guessing about your health with Superpower. For a limited time, our listeners are getting $20 off to unlock their new health intelligence. Head over to superpower.com and use the code Danny for $20 off your membership. That's code DANNY. And after you sign up, they're going to ask how you heard about Superpower, and do us a favor and let them know that the Danny Jones podcast sent you.
I feel like this is the main theme behind most of your work, as you like expose this hidden occult architecture behind everything that's happening like in the modern world with corporations and politics and world leaders and all this stuff.
Yeah, I try to do that because I feel like everything is like fully connected. I mean, we didn't just, there's nothing new under the sun, as they say.
Right.
When we talk about something like money and currency and these ideas, again, back to the Sumerians, they, started all of these different systems, and then it influenced all of the areas around them, like the Mediterranean, ancient Egypt, and all of this. And it's just been something that has laid a foundation for what we're living in now. So when I was doing my graduate work, I looked into the history of early modern free markets and just little things that kind of made me think, oh, this is where these come from. So like the term bank, even just something like, why is it a free market? It was like literally like a farm market. People would go and they'd put out all their stuff, and then people would bring like these tokens, and they were money. They're like selling money essentially, and they would put it on a bench, which would be a bunk, and they would put it out. And when they were out of it and done, they would break the bank to signify that we're out, we don't have any. So when you're broke or you break the bank, it comes from that. And it's like, That's interesting. We're using a lot of this. Like, there's such a disconnect between like the world that we are in now and like the world that is really underneath it all. So just like something like meat, right? We go to the store, we pick up a nicely packaged little steak, and sometimes it's shrink wrapped. There's all these labels on it, and it's just like, look at this thing we're going to cook. And we don't necessarily consider all of the things that it took to get that with animals and that they're living beings, etc.
Yeah.
We just kind of take it for, that's meat. We even have the words for it as such. Like we have cow versus beef. Like, you know, there's the animal, but there's the animal product. So likewise with, say, like the money system.
Yeah, that's funny, right?
Yeah.
We think of that as two separate things.
Yeah, because that's how we sort of, well, with pork and pig, and these are words that came from the French, like when the Normans like came in and they were like, we have beef, and then there's the people who were there, who they sort of did the whole Anunnaki thing with, like, we're going to take you over. The regular people who were farming it, knew it as a cow, would keep the word cow, but they referenced it as like beef. And so that just stayed because the language kind of like grew and changed. But we still have those words now where we differentiate between cow and beef. And I think that's where it starts to get really interesting when you start to divorce reality from where it began. That really just does give a lot of people power, because think about, do you understand banking systems? I mean, I think the only person I personally like agree knows most about it is Catherine Fitz, but
oh yeah, she's great.
She's amazing. Gosh. But I mean, plenty of people know about it, but it's
like the whole system with Wall Street and all the stuff in the banks was designed intentionally to be extremely confusing.
I agree 100%. And that's part of the whole setup there. And it's mathematically based. Again, it's like a cult of math magicians, or,
yes.
You know, that's really what it is.
That's why Epstein called himself the Magi.
Yes. And people sometimes question, well, why did Epstein get so much power? He didn't even go to school and do all this, he's teaching or whatever. Like, what? He was recognized early as having mathematic abilities. Math, it reigns supreme. And math is, some have said, math is the language of God. You know, what is real? Like you just said, if it's words, it could be messed with. If it's numbers,
right.
It's fact. It's quantitative. Even back to like if saying something's a hard science versus a soft science, what differentiates that? The quantitative analysis of it, not the qualitative. The amount, not the, so that's an important, numeracy is very important to this. And so that gives you the basis of reality, what's real. And it can be modeled out then. So if you have something like stripping down to its most basic thing, we have abstraction after abstraction until everything's confusing, like, beef or whatever. And then you get down to its baseline, then you can have a shot at understanding it or modeling it. So
right.
This is essentially, in my view, what's been going on a lot with Epstein's desire to really pour a lot of money into science, is the quest for immortality. Because at the end, that's what they all want, is to live forever. That's the
right.
goal of transhumanism. We're going to transcend it. That's the oldest trick in the book. Again, back to the Sumerians again, ad nauseum. But the Epic of Gilgamesh was the same idea. It was the same idea of the king who wanted to resurrect or help his friend Enkidu, who happened to be a wild man. Described very much like some sort of like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something. Like it was like the stress of a early civilization where perhaps there were people still living who were not in the walls of the city. And they described this guy as like formidable to the king, and he was real hairy and wild, and he drank with the gazelles. So what they did to go get him was they took one of their temple prostitutes out there to seduce him, bring him back to the city, and they humanized him. They civilized him by giving him a bath and shaving him and have some sex with some nice ladies. And now all of a sudden he's like, I'm here to win it. And as the story goes, he ends up befriending the king, and of course Gilgamesh goes and he's trying to find this plant that would give everlasting life. But it's like the fountain of youth. I mean, that's literally the oldest story, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. So from our oldest story, the point is we have to search for the thing that is going to give us everlasting life. We want to live forever. And so that is the quest, is biohacking your way to it, or perhaps figuring out the mathematic formula of living forever. And what would that look like? because if you know the math of it, the fundamentals, if math is the reality, then you're going to be able to model it, predict it, and then control it.
And this connects to how he was so obsessed with entropy.
Yeah.
He was always talking about entropy and talking to Lawrence Krauss about this. And all that.
Yeah. So if you look through the Epstein emails, you see that he had this quest to understand entropy, to really figure out different ways to master it, to harness it, to kind of, in my view, transcend it. Mm-hmm. So
he wanted to hack it. Right?
Hack it.
Because
yes.
the second law of thermodynamics is like order dissolves over time.
Yes.
Everything becomes more chaotic.
Chaotic.
The heat death of the universe will eventually happen.
Yeah, and so the way that I kind of went into this a little is because since I've talked about Anunnaki stuff and of course ancient alien type things and these civilizations, I hear a lot about free energy. I mean, we have Disclosure Day, all this, everybody's talking about. What is it? Free energy. That's supposedly what it is that they're hiding all this from, is because what if we got free energy? And I'm thinking, well, what if we got free energy? So,
right.
I mean, there's like pretty much an industry now of Disclosure Inc. that's like telling us like it's about free energy. Okay, what's the energy going to do? Power our civilization? Like we're going to not pay electric bills? I don't think that all of this like disclosure hiding things is just because we, would like to have free renewable resources or free resources. Likewise, it's not to get us off world. It's free energy means we're going to be able to planet hop. Okay, well, good luck, passing through the radiation. I mean, like, let's solve one problem at a time. I do not think that is the ultimate idea. I think that what we are looking at, especially with free energy, it already gives this pop cultural notion of just it's free. Like it's there with no cost. It's free. It's but like the first law of thermodynamics, like energy can't be created or destroyed. So how is it like what's going on here? It doesn't even make sense. So when we talk about entropy, we're talking about the energy loss of something that is able to be skimmed, it's able to be harnessed, and then that way it's free, as in free out of that system. It's been freed. So as opposed to some people think it's free, it's a free-for-all energy. Like, no. This is the energy that happens that you might be able to skim off of. And it starts to be weirdly Kabbalistic, weirdly Platonic in some ways, and very much linked to the idea of like the monad, the dyad, and the triad. This Gnostic. I mean, we can throw all these buzzwords out, but that's because everyone sort of had a bit of this so-called metaphysical truth, like the blind men and the elephant idea, where they're all, blind men standing around an elephant. One's holding a tail, one's holding a trunk, and another a leg, and they're arguing over what it is that they have. And they're all right, but they just can't see the bigger picture. And so that's the utility of siloing people into these disciplines and things.
Yes.
So that's important, because if you have a discipline, so like you say, evolutionary biology, you have that. You have, we'll say archaeology, we'll say, psychology, whatever.
Yeah, no
everything.
One's interdisciplinary.
That's the problem, and that's the point. Because what is it that underlies the whole thing? If you want to prove any of these disciplines, if you want to go and you're going to speak at an event and you want to bolster your claims, you're going to want charts and graphs. You're going to want numbers. I mean, they even will tell you that. Like, there's funny books about that, lying with statistics.
Look at this immigration chart.
Yeah. As soon as people see numbers, they're like, I believe you. And that's a known, a phenomena in psychology anyway. So, of course, you just put pie charts up of just nothing and say, well, according to this pie chart. So numbers.
I'm not going to crunch those numbers, but he's got the numbers up there, so it must be true.
It's numbers. They're scary. He's probably right.
Yeah.
So you put the numbers there as to say this is ultimate truth, because math is reality. Math is truth. Mm-hmm. So the math is what's underneath it all. And you have all these different disciplines, and they're working for all these different things, looking at what they're interested in. But in a way, though, they're finding the mathematic formulas. And so like with entropy, people have come across entropy in most notably communication studies. So so a lot of these concepts, and sometimes what happens is they'll use different words. And so this is where academies comes in, where you're going to like go into a field and you are going to have to learn their jargon. And sometimes it's just like, isn't this A? And it's like, yeah, but we say it like B. that's just discipline-specific jargon,
Right.
and that's part of academies. Well, that serves to hide things, of course. But
right. Even
then,
the word entropy was just like who created that word again?
Neumann.
Von Neumann.
Von Neumann. And he was like, well, we'll call it entropy because people don't really know what it is. And that's like a legit quote. Like it was intentionally used to obfuscate. So, we have that with, I'm not a physicist, so I'm not going to go deep into this, but the idea of dark matter. And dark matter is, another one of those, like, we're going to put a cool name to something that, does it exist? I mean, we see there's evidence that it exists, but then to articulate it as dark matter gives it a very visual thing. It gives it something where it makes it feel like in the psyche of people that it's a legitimate found object, but at the end, it's another way to solve a mathematic problem.
Right.
That people are working with. They're modeling things out.
Yes.
And it may or may not work, that's fine. But when people just get it, it's just easy to sort of say, oh, well, that's a thing.
Put it in this box.
Put it in this box.
Yeah.
And then we kind of move along and say, well, obviously the ancient Greeks didn't really know a whole lot. They're running around with white, like marble crumbling around them. What do they know? And like, we just don't even think about how advanced people were in their thinking, what they were able to do, and maybe their motives behind it too. Like Isaac Newton. I mean, people are familiar with his work that, the father of some, well, not, all he was doing was trying to do advanced calculations to find the end of the world. He was very much about like end times and that sort of thing.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And, for the record, it's 2060 is what he came across. So get your storable foods and your life straws or whatever, your bunkers, build it now, because in 2060, it's
How
all
did he
going
come
down.
up with that?
Well, he invented calculus, so he calculated it. I know. And by the
Holy
way,
shit.
What's so cool about him is his writing is tiny. Okay, another thing to not take things for granted. Like, we have so much, yet we just can't do anything. So his writing is tiny because he couldn't necessarily afford paper. Paper was expensive. And so you would write very tiny and on the edges of things. And so his notes are just because you didn't waste paper, because paper was expensive and he wasn't made of money, although he was trying to make money, literally, because he was an alchemist. And he got in a little trouble for that too, trying to make money. Yeah, weird stuff. But a lot of cool stuff is like known about him, but it's just not talked about.
Interesting.
He was an alchemist, and he was more into occulted things, hermeticism, and all of that.
Wasn't Epstein talking about him in that interview with Bannon?
Oh, yeah.
All about Newton.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's where their interests lie because, well, they're trying to get to the mathematical.
I had this dude on the podcast, Dean Radin, who was talking about how he had a Zoom call with Jeffrey Epstein. And it was a 20-minute Zoom call. And he said that his perspective was he wasn't aware of any of the allegations against him. And he knew that Epstein funded all of the smartest people that he knew. So he's like, fuck, I want to get some funding. I'll do a Zoom call with this guy, or a Skype, whatever it was back then. And he said he had him on the call for 20 minutes, and all he did was ask him to tell him stories about spoon bending.
What? Like Ingo Swann kind of things? Oh, well, because Epstein was much more metaphysically inclined than people would, I think, have us to believe. And you can tell that with the Bannon interview, too, because he was talking about God and the nature of things. And in a lot of his emails, he's discussing this. So whether or not he, his religious beliefs, et cetera, I mean, it's inconsequential. He had not a single-minded, just, materialist perspective. He had the door open for something else. And he was funding it, too. And weird things that are often related to occultic ideas like Atlantis.
Yeah.
A big one there, because a lot of people who are interested in linking this so-called like antediluvian bloodline thing, the ones that perhaps were the bloodline of the Anunnaki. So like this, in this category of peoples who survived the Younger Dryas and maybe had a breakaway civilization, moved and settled in Mesopotamia, and then had this like royal bloodline. This kind of thinking has led people to think, well, perhaps that was Atlantis, not the Aquaman kind of version of Atlantis, but like more of like a Plato's Atlantis, and just a fabled place of like the golden age, which is a term that you hear thrown around a lot for that very reason. And it's not just because of Atlantis being like this really cool story from, Plato, but because later it gets mythologized from Theosophy as like the core component of like the root race theory. If you're familiar with that.
Familiar.
Well, that's where a lot of those like Nordics and things like that come from. And that informed the Vril Society and a lot of the thinking that was going on at the time.
Well, it's interesting. I think I learned this from Jason Giorgiani in one of his articles about this. He was saying that there were some male people, some Norwegian guys, like young men, who were hired by Ghislaine to go to the Zorro Ranch.
Yes.
And like, I forget what they were doing, but they were describing how like they would catch her in their bedroom stealing like their hair off the pillows and stuff.
She really wanted to find Atlantis too. So what is that about? And they're going to spend a lot of money trying to find Atlantis, trawling the bottom of the ocean to try to find this. But you know, it speaks to that root race kind of golden age era of people's thinking, their mythos, that there's going to be maybe another cataclysm and that the people of this royal elite bloodline are going to be able to, you know, ride it out or come back out with this golden age. Kind of like the stuff Bannon talks about or believes in, so to speak, with the Kali Yuga. That's he's big on that stuff, which is that cyclical. It's like from Hindu. So it's kind of an important distinction because a lot of the stuff that comes into Western esotericism does so through the East and this period in the 19th century where people got very interested in Indian sort of maybe Hindu or Hindic ideas. They went over there. A lot of people from Britain, although Helena Blavatsky was Russian, but a lot of people in those circles would go travel to India, be enchanted with some cool ideas, get themselves a guru, and then come back and start making brotherhoods and associations. And that is connected to that mystery school that I got involved with and then dropped out of. And that mystery school is the Lucis Trust Arcane School. And so that one,
Lucis Trust.
The Lucis Trust. Yes. And so they have a UN affiliation, and they even have a meditation room at the United Nations headquarters that has a big altar in the middle of it and some lovely, art. And yeah.
Does it look anything like this room?
It kind of reminded me of it a little bit, not going to lie. So, but yeah, that's the way that I got looped into that a little bit was because my curiosity was just like, I got to know, what's this person doing? What's that? And I'm getting these, correspondences. And I came across this information and I was like, let me see, And so I applied and the application was just really detailed. Then I talked with somebody, they wanted to know my genetic background, which I thought, that's weird, right? I didn't give them my 23andMe or anything, but I did give them a snapshot of it. And I'm like, okay, so I would not advise this obviously to people, but I didn't even think. I was just like, I want that information. What's going on? I got one thing leads to another. And then I'm like, before I knew it, I was a student enrolled. And I'm like, okay, now what? Right. And so I'm very interested in this. I'm like, they're all love and light, which, if you know anyone who's into that, some people are very authentic in that and good for them. But there are a lot of people who use love and light as a different kind of moniker. So they hide what it is they're actually doing or thinking behind this. So essentially, Lucis Trust is pretty open to, you can go on their website and look up most of their materials. And so it's another
Didn't they change it from Lucifer or something?
They sure did. It was the Lucifer Trust, Lucifer Publishing. And it was started by Alice Bailey, who was a theosophist, who broke away from Annie Besant, who, again, going back to that time in Britain in particular where socialism was kind of bubbling up and people were trying to be more civic and have civil rights and this sort of thing. A big movement in the feminist movement was this Annie Besant, and the Theosophical movement was behind a little of that. Also freeing India because they had a vested interest in India. And so they made their, they made a name for themselves doing that stuff. But it was in the service of this kind of occulted view. So going back even further, but not that much further, to the 1800s, you have Eliphas Levi, who was the guy who did the art of Baphomet. If you know Baphomet and you can imagine what Baphomet looks like, that is from Eliphas Levi. So he was a magician.
Right.
And he created Baphomet and all of this as a socialist sort of icon.
I always get Baphomet and Pan mixed up.
They're easy to do. Yeah. That
Gus
one on the
Baphomet.
Wikipedia. Yeah, that's the classic drawing. So he did this because he was actually a Catholic priest. And he decided that socialism was actually the true Catholicism, is what he called it. And so he dropped out. He turned himself into a magician and wrote a very influential books on magic, and influenced Crowley and others. And so the notion of socialism was really wrapped up into this and people's view of it. And so people were just getting into a fervor. It was the like the occultic revival later. So so all of this is happening, and people get really interested in importing these Eastern ideas, which in what's called the second occult revival in the 1960s, you see them kind of repeating the same thing with the Beatles going out and getting themselves gurus and doing this, and an influx of like natural food stores and hippies and whatever. But in Anton LaVey, that whole like current that runs through that is the second occult revival that sort of links itself to the first, which was going on here with Levy, figures like Besant and Alice Bailey. And so they're essentially doing these like magic workings. And yes, it's Lucifer Publishing that ended up being the Lucis Trust. So I was curious and I wanted to know, what are they up to? What's going on? And I ended up getting their correspondence, their bulletins, and they're wild. One thing that they did that I thought was notable was in a very culty way, they assign you what they call a secretary, but they're really just a handler because they're a licensed clinical psychologist. Like that seems like a lot. Why do you need all that? If you're not going to like try to brainwash a person, right? I mean, isn't that kind of, yeah. So that was interesting. And so this person kind of like wants you to do these monthly reports. So like meditation reports to the full moon.
Sounds kind of like Scientology.
Totally. Well, that's the thing is all of these things end up being the same kind of practice where, you know, you get to the end of it and your reward is that you're the god of your own world, or you get to have your own, you know, I guess cult at the end of the day. I know, you know, Kurt Metzger always says that same thing. He's like, always reinforces the notion that this is what you're working for at the very end of it. Like, ta-da, you get to be like L. Ron Hubbard. You get to have your own. But it's very true. It's 100% true because that is it's sort of not even a mystery box at the end. It's like, yep, that's what you get. You get to be on top, whether it's, you know, Mormons getting their own planet or whatever. So
what was it? Like Lucis Trust, like what ultimately, like what was its goal?
I think now, see, if you look and get into their literature, you can go deep into all the different threads. But my takeaway, the entire purpose, is that there's a couple different things. But I think ultimately the idea is that you're trying to give up all of your energy into one hive mind. And you're doing that through perhaps altered states like meditation, though deep meditation. You're involved in what's called triangles, where there's three people and those people kind of agree to meet telepathically. You know, but what you're doing too isn't just like the self-improvement. It's all based in trying to help what they call the new group of world servers. And it's like, that's weird, right? They even have a plan. They call the plan aptly with a capital P. And so when people say things like, there's not hidden hands and people aren't trying to plan stuff, there's no new world order. It's like, well, there is, but the thing is they're not all united.
It's not a monolith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's groups who fancy themselves like better at it than others, or their flavor of it's better, or they're going to do it for this reason. And everyone's operating in their own little silos, but they all are doing things that at the end, they're wanting to have a big power grab, and they feel that maybe magic is a way to do it. And maybe sitting around doing full moon meditation, praying for Henry Kissinger, which is exactly what they're up to, is going to be somehow the way to do it. And it's like, and then they tell people that you're doing such good for humanity, but it's like the ultimate slacktivism. Because what are you actually doing? Although they did help fund the Occupy movement. They actually, when the website for Occupy Wall Street came up, they were the ones who bought the website.
Interesting.
And then they took that down. They scrubbed the who is and all of that information. But they're very much involved in activism that way. But it's all under the guise of unity and we're all together. And these are things that you can't deny it would be good, that everyone just, can't we all just get along, right? Okay, but the thing is, we're not that way. We're biologically programmed to be like in a hierarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just a lot, and we can work against that. We can try to use our minds to overcome that, fine. But when you see people enforcing this like collectivism, it's not generally for the betterment of individuals, it's the betterment of a collective. Who defines the collective? Is it going to be like, if you say politics, is it for the left? Is it for the right, which are all made up terms? Is it for the Christians, or is it for, Jewish people? Is it for Muslims? Is it Arab, there's Abrahamic, we'll lump them together in one big, we're just dividing, but leveraging these tactics to sort of unite under coalitions, but it serves to divide.
Where does this Lucis Trust get this money from?
Well, Rockefeller Foundation, they get donations. They get, they are a nonprofit, and so some of that's available. But they are privately funded, or I should say individually funded. So donations and that sort of thing. And some of it's really, some of it's hard to track down, but some of it's just older money that's been in accounts as well. But they offer everything for free. So like you could join the school and become a student and, do it. I would suggest, because people don't have to actually be a student. You don't have to practice this. You can just, and of course now they'll probably say like, okay, our sign up's gone, because they might get a flood of people who are like, I want to see what's going on in there. But I took a long time to collect all of that, those documents, because they send them as papers by design that are typed by design. Even though plenty of the information is available digitally, there is information still that's not available that they send from their, what they call headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, London, and on Wall Street, New York. Wow. And so they've had their hands in a lot of different things, but they're basically like, they build themselves as like the spiritual center of the United Nations. So they want spiritual unity, world peace, and all the stuff that just sounds great. And so you can see how people get sucked into it with like love and light. But other people who are involved, who go deep in it, are like a lot of people from MIT, a lot of people who are interested in the electric gods theory, and this notion that like the universe is electric and our gods are actually electric. And so they get really deep into science and these sorts of things as well. But it's just one flavor of many things, like you said.
And preparing humanity for a Christ-like figure or something like this?
Yes, that is a big one. They do that through their Great Invocation. It is what they call the world prayer. And it's a little creepy because they use these terms that are familiar with people culturally, like Christ, but they don't mean Jesus. They also use Maitreya, which is a Buddhist term for that figure. So people will say, oh, you're going to demonize Maitreya? You're not demonizing Buddhism. They're co-opting, because that's what these occult movements did. They just went to India. They plucked a bunch of cool shit. They came over and mixed it up with the Western esoteric thought, made something new. And, now they're pushing it as like New Age, that's where that comes from. It's the New Age. So so they're trying to usher in. So their goal is to get everybody united and get everybody prepared by following the plan for the coming one. And that coming one is the world teacher. And that world teacher will like unite everybody. And it sounds very like alien religion oriented as well. Like the Rallians and all of those.
And you connected this somehow in one of your pieces about chaos magic being used to like introduce this like religious context into people's lives as a means to like control their reality.
So chaos magic, I think, is a very underestimated form of magic, we'll say. And magic too, when I say magic, I mean, magic is like essentially action from a distance. It's imposing your will onto something, like your will be done, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So in some sense, you want to have like a powerful willpower. And so you can, practice these different things like subconsciously to, better your life, or you can put your will onto others. So you're like taking away their free will and you're doing things against them. And so, but magic at the end of the day, people are trying to find ways to hack other people's willpower so they can control them. And so in a lot of ways it's psychology.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways that's not satisfactory to some people. So you have, chaos magic, which is Peter Carroll, who passed away recently, kind of in the 70s started writing more about that and formalizing it using, mathematic concepts and more scientific concepts and trying to, I don't know about trying to legitimize magic, but I think that's what he was inadvertently doing, whether he meant to or not. But the idea of chaos being introduced into a system for a desired outcome is an important one that seems to be at play with the Bannon type people who, are sowing those seeds of chaos all the time, having people break up into little groups and fight amongst each other and whatever. But it serves more than just to divide us. It actually serves this like energy in a mathematical concept where they're able to harness that energy and use it to implement their strategies. Again, this is not necessarily, I'm saying that this is how the world works. This is how people who practice magic in certain fields, this is what they think is working. So it's like when they say sigil magic, people are like, oh, sigil magic, you might find a book that says charge a sigil. Sigil's like a symbol essentially. And there's many different ways to make the symbol, but essentially it's a symbol, but it needs charged. And some people will say, oh, you put it out in the full moon and the moon magic will charge it. Great. But then advanced sigil magic can get into, well, do we really want to know how sigils are charged? Because when I talk about it, then people will say, wait, we don't want to hear it. It's like, I'm going to tell you how sigils are charged. It's charged through like, you stare at it with that great intention. And one way is to vigorously masturbate until you put out all your vril, your life force, your animal magnetism, you name it. Loosh, if you're into Robert Monroe. This concept of this like energy, this vital force that we have inside of us that people have been trying to like categorize for a long time. But that is what charges. That's the magic. And so people will be like, I got to make my sigil work. And they're going to go, now you got one guy and he's, doing the deed, staring at the sigil. He's going to charge it. But how can we make it more magical? Well, maybe we have two people doing it. Okay, now maybe we have ritual sex. But, it's not about just the generative force or the sex or the spilling of the seed. It is about getting the maximum energy out of it. So that would be the most extreme emotion. So you have extreme pleasure. So that's the orgasm. So now that's Kama Sutra. This is not just like Sting likes to like take a long time to please the ladies kind of thing. No, Kama Sutra is, and that's an old reference, so I'm sure nobody, who's Sting? It's like, Google it. But no, but here's the thing. When you're practicing that, you're trying to basically like edge. You're like, trying to hold it in as long as you can so that now, boom, that's some magic sigil action right there. So we got the magic sigil, and now we need to make it more magical. So we're going to get more people involved. But what's the opposite of pleasure is pain. And we're not distinguishing between like types. It's severity, it's extremity. So another way to charge a sigil is through blood, through torture, through extreme misery and pain and suffering. So that's another way to charge a sigil is you can be a kid like just like dabbling like little blood, but then you're going to need more of that power. So maybe a little small animal. Okay, what's next? You can just like dream on. Now what happens when you go to, how about we mix that, right? We got extreme pleasure and pain. Okay, you can kind of see where this is going to go. When somebody really wants to make something magically charged, before you know it, you're having ritual orgies that end in torture and abuse and bloodletting and not killing, because killing is just... We don't want to waste that. We have to have back to that like warrior blood thing. You don't just kill, you have to make the suffering such that when you spill the blood, that it's powerful. And you spill that blood on the sigil. And that sigil then will carry that power. Whoa. Yeah. So it gets really dark. And some people will be like, some people get mad about that because it's like you're telling secrets if you say, well, this is how we go from that like incrementalism. Nobody's going to say like, hey, why don't you come over tonight? We're going to have this big like orgy and we're going to like kill some babies and over this. Nobody's going to do that. They start with little things like, we're just going to like, rub one out while watching this thing. Or we're going to like, and it's like, okay, that's a little weird, but to each his own. Yeah. And then it's like, it escalates and escalates.
Yes. Yeah.
And so again, not everybody does this. Very few people do this, but it is a thing and it is documented in magic. And so sometimes you see these like superficial books that'll say, charge your sigil in the moonlight, girls. It's often like, healing crystals and stuff. And that's fine. And that's a way. But people think different thoughts. And just because you're not doing it or, whatever, doesn't mean other people aren't thinking this way or doing this. And just because somebody wears a suit and a tie and they get up and they tell you how they're going to fix, job numbers and they're going to make the economy better and they're going to vote for this right, for this, for that, doesn't mean they're not doing some weird shit too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's important to explain to people, although you can literally look up these grimoires, you can literally look them up everywhere. You can read for yourself the practices. People will all the time deny, because they will try to say like Crowley. They'll say, well, when he admitted to sacrificing all these children, he was talking about, essentially. He's just like, well,
Crowley?
Yeah. So because he admitted to sacrificing all these children because that was the ultimate in the sacrifice as a child, of course. Well, he later says, well, no, I didn't really kill kids. It was just because, I masturbated and I spilled my seed and that was the sacrifice of my children. Cool. Okay. What else? Jesus. But that's what people will say. So it's but then those are what's called occult blinds too. It's so how do we know? And so people pick on Crowley, people pick on these individuals, but I think what's important is to look at, rather than the aesthetic of it, which can be oh, it's cool. It's like Baphomet. It looks pretty rock and roll. But Baphomet is actually symbolizing something very ancient, very mathematic. It's still the worship of three because of the androgyny component. It's very important. That androgynous component is essential to this thinking about control and what it is to conquer God. So it's the lament of God being dead. This is the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment thought where people were the Nietzsche quote everyone's familiar with, where he says, God is dead. And they read that it's this hooray. But even Nietzsche didn't think that. He said, God is dead and we have killed him. We're murderers of all murderers. And he laments, who's going to wash the blood off of our hands? And so he's painting this picture of first of all, he didn't say we beat him up. He's talking about a sacrifice, that we took a knife. He paints this picture of there being God and we, the humans, murderers of all murderers, because that's apex predator shit right there. Because you killed God. You can't get any higher than that. But we killed God. We sacrifice him. We have blood on us. But who's going to wash the blood? Blood like atonement. Who's going to then invent what great games of atonement will be invented? Recognizing the idea of the Greeks and other ancient peoples, making the games to appease the gods. He goes on this lament of now what? We just killed God. And now we're oh shit. And he ends it with this notion of, he says, must we not become gods ourselves, if only not to appear worthy of it? So two things there. He sets the tone, he sets the groundwork for transhumanism. What he does, he's coy. Because he says, he puts that bit of doubt in there, must we not become gods, if only to appear worthy? We're never even, it's going to be a simulation still. But that's the complexity of Nietzsche, where people can use his words to say, God's dead, all right. Or, oh no, God's dead, now we just can't do anything on our own. And you can just take that. But that's why he was brilliant, is because the way that he wrote, it left us with this uncomfortable truth of the gray area of now what? And ever since then and beyond, we're grappling with the idea of what do we do now? We're going to die. What do we do now that we're conscious and we have all these realizations? So yeah, it's the transhumanist dream, and it's this idea of battling nature and winning. So you beat God at his own game, which is what Epstein was doing in those emails too.
But it does seem like there's this new resurgence of spirituality in the West, and specifically also Christianity from these people like Peter Thiel and all of this stuff. It seems to be becoming more popular. And I think that you said something in one of your essays about the church is ramping up some spiritual warfare stuff in 2026.
Yeah. So the thing is Thiel is really interested in utilizing Christianity. Now, I'm not going to make windows into men's hearts, so I'm not going to say whether or not he believes one thing or another. I can only say that he has also said that the Christian faith is going to be the best faith to use for the purposes that he has, which would be to...
He said this?
Yeah. Yeah, he gave lectures on the Antichrist. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But he also has a event called Hereticon, where he invites a lot of individuals to attend. It's a secret, kind of like closed door thing, celebrating being heretics, of course. But his view so he can be very paradoxical, because it's like he was raised evangelical, so he's evangelical Christian. But how can he be this rabid evangelical, like end times Christian, like looking for an eschatology, Israel supporting all of this, but also be like homosexual, having like strange like other beliefs and wanting to like there seems to be like incongruency in what he says. Well, that's because when you look at it, a lot of this is because we are looking at it through our limited understanding of particular philosophies. When you understand that he was a student and it just a total follower of René Girard, then it makes sense. Mm-hmm. So you got to look at who these people are studying, because they're often these like gray areas or these differently defined things. And so those things can coexist in other frameworks. They just don't coexist in our day-to-day framework. And so that's why it looks like it doesn't make sense. But he didn't care what we think. He has an agenda, and that agenda, some people think he's the Antichrist, but he would argue against that.
Well, no, he thinks Greta Thunberg's the Antichrist.
Right. So, how dare you say that about Greta? So, no, he does think that, but he has this view that he is more like the thing that is the Kratikon. So that's like a figure from Paul's writing in the Bible that discusses there's a figure that comes before the Antichrist that sort of holds it at bay. So just hold on, Antichrist, hold on, all of this. And so what he has talked about doing is sort of he sees like the writing on the wall, and he's going to try to make sort of an escape for us all. So this idea, like when it comes down to something like God is dead, like we have all this like energy built up, like what do we do? People are more secular, but they are not really secular, because if you don't believe in that, you're just going to another ism.
Yeah.
If you're not like into whatever ism, you're going to be into something political. Even if you're not a political minded person, you're going to be all into sports. Something is going to grab you and inspire you and become your religion. And so his view was that we're since so fractured, if we want to get everybody to think the same, we need to find something that is not new. He's not going to try to invent a religion, because nobody would you like sign up for the Church of Peter Thiel? Like, no, I don't think that's a hard sell. But he's like, well, Christianity, of course, but that's because of the sacrificial system as well that Girard was very much into. This idea of the sacrifice. That's scapegoat. Yes. And so that is a very important notion, because in this concept, and Girard, amazing thinker, amazing writer, but some of these ideas, like when you take them and you try to go apply them to the real world, maybe they don't work out. Maybe we should keep them in the ivory tower while we argue about it for a little bit. But he observed this thing where essentially once there's so much division, so much entropy lost, that there needs to be a reset. That can only be done through a scapegoat. And I'm paraphrasing and distilling this a lot, but there needs to be a scapegoat so that we can like essentially have a pressure release valve.
Yeah.
And so it's all like managed chaos. It's all like just about controlling the inevitable. And again, putting us non-billionaires in positions of like livestock, essentially, that we need to be herded and managed and culled if necessary, but all for the greater good, of course. But the idea of a scapegoat being the thing. So the Sumerians had this idea too of the scapegoat on their. They kind of started that we know of, that there was there was a coin they called a mash, and that meant the kid, like the little goat. And so it was an idea that from the very beginning, there was this need to sacrifice an animal over time that shifted, kind of like the incrementalism again. What's more precious than the firstborn of your herd? Well, maybe a little bit later, and the gods get hungry. They want something a little better than that. They want your firstborn child. So like it gets to be that slippery slope where before you know it, you're having like human sacrifice as part of your religion. So a lot of this, it's theorized that it's because of mimetic desire. This notion that we want something just because another person has it or others have it, so then we want it. We don't really want the thing. We just want it because we're told we want it.
Yeah.
So this becomes essentially really great for capitalism because you can see ads all day like, this person has this drink and you want it too because you want to be like them. And it's like, yes, I'll get it. But you don't really want it. Are you thirsty right now? If you are thirsty, is that the drink you want? You don't think about that. You're just like, desire, desire, desire.
Yeah.
So that's great for capitalism, but not great for this notion of entropy loss. Because all of a sudden you're losing, like, you're getting too many people. So like, you need to have in this like system, again, it's like a physics thing, mathematic thing, but also economic thing, because back to the idea that everything gets siloed, all these fields are actually related if you come down to their mathematic formulas.
Yeah.
Can they be proven via math? Can they be quantified and then as such be predicted and modeled and repeated? Because that's what we want. We want to control. We want to control the future, know the future. We want to master God or nature. Which were like interchangeable back in those days, like in the Enlightenment. So this is kind of like the thing that he's looking at is this pressure release valve that we have this capitalist society, and not that he's anti-capitalist, but that you need this pressure release valve. You need the scapegoat. And ancient societies knew that too. And every now and then they would, have to kill or do something to release that scapegoat, but for financial purposes. It was part of the economic system. So a lot of the things that we see that look strange or they're boring because they just have like, Charles Schwab or, JP Morgan or some sort of like, company name on it, math, interest, all of this really has its roots in things that are far more nefarious in the sense that they're controlling people at their very basic level. And they think that they're doing some really good stuff though. Like they don't look at it anymore like it's usury. So that was something that, charging interest, that idea of interest, going back to that Sumerian concept for the kid coin, that was about interest. So they were first to charge interest. But interest later became like usury and it was outlawed. But people were still allowed to do it as long as they started calling it not like interest, but maybe like a finder's fee or some sort of fee. They started finding ways around it. But it was known that if you start playing with the money this way, it would end up in a mass like death kind of thing, like a scapegoat would be needed because everybody would get so fractured, you would need the scapegoat event. So that's, that's they look to those examples, they look at the past and they look at all of the potentials for how they can just figure out the world's problems that they're looking to figure out using essentially math and their understanding of the ancient world, which are history and math are, I think, two things that are not well taught to students in any schools because most people will say, I didn't like history class, it was boring. It's like, yeah. But people who are in positions of power are taught history. They're taught their family history. They're taught their bloodline history. They're taught about the classical antiquity, the philosophy, the 7 liberal arts. We're not taught a lot of that. We're taught by rote memorization. Tell me when this happened. Tell me who did that. Move on to the next test. And it's like, who cares? And then math, of course. Everybody's famously bad at math. But by design. So as a conspiracy-minded person at this point, I would suggest that is massively the biggest psyop is to just dumb us down to the point where we can be controlled.
And you think this like resurgence in spirituality and Peter Thiel trying to use Christianity is like try to paint everything that is happening in Silicon Valley through this Christian lens. You think that is directly related to that somehow?
They want a new mythology. They need a new narrative because we can't. First of all, it'd be really nice in this like post-enlightenment, God is dead world to say we don't need that. Just, you'll hear people from that new atheist camp back in the day go, just don't be an asshole.
Right.
Okay, but who defines asshole? Because that's going to be very different across cultures and time. Like we talked about the Greeks and how different things are. In the Greek mind, the future was behind you and the past was in front of you. Right. So like the mindset, we can't, not just the translations and the interpretations, but the literal thinking was different because their view was like, we knew what happened in the past, so we can see it. We don't know what's in the future. It's behind us. We're getting pulled into the future. That's a mindset shift. This is why language is so damn important.
Right.
Because that frames your whole worldview. And we don't know half the words we're saying. Etymology, I do that in my articles all the time, is say, before we go any further, this is the origin of this word, because it means a lot more, and a lot of words aren't interchangeable. You know, and in religion, you know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. You know, with God, and the Word was God. Word. It's always about the word.
That's another funny thing about the biblical stuff is that it allegedly comes from these Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew, but during that time, everything was written in Greek. There was no Hebrew anywhere. The Library of Alexandria was 100% Greek.
Yeah.
And the only Hebrew we have surviving is these Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in these caves.
Right.
Everything that was written in Hebrew was religious. But if you want to find anything else, you want to find receipts, medical texts, legal texts, philosophical stuff, art stuff, like play, write, whatever it is, poems, it's all Greek.
Yeah.
It's so strange.
It's strange, but not
and it
surprising.
Was like 1.5 million unique words in ancient Greek.
Yeah. Oh, but
ancient Hebrew is only like 7,000.
This is the point. That is a very important point. Okay, so there is a language that's considered the simplest language known. It's the Piraha people. They're in the Amazon. Their language was almost used for computer programming. It was so simple. It's so simple. First of all, they believe it comes from the simple humming and hunting noises, so song, like the most rudimentary form of communication. Now, they were discovered by a missionary, a guy who went in the 70s, and it's very controversial because this was anthropology, where it's okay, you're messing with the folk, we don't want to do that, whatever. But his research still couldn't be denied because he lived with them, and so it's we begrudgingly have to listen to his research. But it's fascinating because he goes there and he's I'm going to tell you all the good news, and he starts telling them the gospel and all of this. So he has this adventure with them where he realizes these people seem dumber than a box of rocks. They can't count, they can't whatever. I'm trying to teach them, they don't know anything. What he ended up understanding, though, is that because of their language, their minds work differently. Okay?
Yeah.
They could not understand quantity. They had no art. Now, this is fascinating because if you ask, you'll say most people you would think have a religion, a history, art, anything. Not these people. They're a case of a civilization or a group of people with no art, with no story, with no religion, with no numbers, with nothing. The most simple language. So some people theorize that maybe there was something wrong with their corpus callosum because of maybe Janesian theory. There's a guy, Princeton psychologist named Julian Jaynes, who theorized that consciousness came from the breakdown of the bicameral mind, that we had almost like the master and the emissary concept, if you're familiar with that. So this notion that he did this, by the way, through reading the Greek texts and saying, it sounds like they were talking in a disembodied way until later it didn't. So he started picking up in the ancient texts that the way they spoke almost was like someone was telling them. And then later they embodied that voice.
Whoa.
So when you look at this, now think of ancestor worship. That's the oldest kind of form of worship in an anthropological framework. You have ancestor worship where it's you revere your ancestors, and the shaman might hear the voice or conjure the voice of the ancestors. In a Janesian framework, you would say that's because dad is the only one that actually remembers grandpa's voice. How many times could you say yeah, you know what grandpa would have said? Because So now if you're telling people who never met grandpa, here's what he said, and he acted like this. You're taking on the persona. You're kind of possessed. You're inspired by grandpa. You're possessed with the voice of grandpa in that moment. So you now are passing that language on. You're revering sort of the ancestor you're worshiping up.
Channeling them.
Exactly. And so that's ancestor worship, but then also it kind of starts to go into these different areas of animism and all of this, where according to Jaynes and his work, which I highly recommend, it was very lauded, although some of it's a little controversial, but the notion that there was a point where our consciousness came from the unity, the breakdown and then unity, that there was this interplay between essentially hemispheres, and the hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum, they thought used to just be like a band of tissue, but they realized it was very important for both sides to communicate. So when people have epilepsy, sometimes they'll cut the corpus callosum to stop the communication between the two hemispheres, and it successfully stops the epilepsy.
Really?
It can do other things, though. Like Ramachandran, a great neuroscientist, wrote about how the split brain patients, their left side would have a mind of its own, literally. So sometimes they would write, or they would like intimate or like do something to somebody, but they couldn't stop it. They were not in control. How he ended up fixing that was through having like a mirror, putting the arm there, kind of like what happens with like phantom limb.
Shit,
yeah.
that's
So there's
crazy.
it is crazy. So there's the idea of the corpus callosum being maybe something structurally important for why it was like perhaps we were in a more unified state where we were like Neanderthals painting on stuff. And we were all just like woo vibing, and then all of a sudden we have voices in our head, and we're like, who are the voices? Well, the voice is the memory. If you're like back to Grandpa again, Grandpa Bob's saying stuff to, but you're remembering his voice, but it's your voice. You're getting the voices mixed up. So like, who's talking? So like, like we were talking about math. If I were to say to you, like, were you good at math? Maybe you were. Some people say, no, I'm not. Why weren't you good at math? Well, who told you weren't good at math? Well, my third grade teacher said I kind of wasn't great. Was it your voice? Or who are you? Because we're really an amalgamation of all the things we were told that we were.
Right.
That's why there's feral children. If you take a human and put them out there, they have no identity because it takes being told who you are to even have an identity and know a name. So it's not a small thing. So that if you, so the words matter. So then if you like don't have a sense of I, but you're hearing disembodied voices, you may give them names or you may say it's Grandpa. People can get very confused, but the framework that people may have laid out for this is to just simply say, I'm channeling a voice of this, or this is the muse. In a more advanced context, we have the muses. And when, I think it's the Odyssey, when it opens, it talks about like, Homer's not the one writing it. This is what the muse is saying.
Yeah.
And then we write it.
Yeah.
So it's the inspirare is coming from something disembodied. So it's like how much of our own voice is our own, which is in a psychological sense, therapeutically, that's what they'll do is try to say like, use Socratic questioning, like answer that all the way down. Are you good at math? Are you bad at math? Why? Just try to like know thyself so that you can be the one to be the voice in your own head. Reclaim that. So it's not the voices of your past or some person that said something, but those voices, are disembodied, disincarnate. We have psychology and things now. What about ancient people? When they start like having this breakdown. Now, some people say, well, maybe they were on drugs. Maybe it was the breakdown of the bicameral mind. The catalyst for that was like, stoned ape theory.
Yeah.
Maybe they did some shrooms and whatever. But the problem with that theory is that it wouldn't have been genetic. You'd have had your mind opening experience right then, and it wouldn't have been passed on necessarily to your offspring. Then you have Richard Wrangham, who has a view of, he's a primatologist, and he had the view of catching fire, was what he called it, which was, it was cooking your food allowed the brain's expansion. And that could have been then passed on genetically because of the nutritive value of food. So like a cell wall is so thick you can't really get the nutrients out of it easily until you cook it, and then it releases that. And so heat allowed a more bioavailable nutrient thing. And there's some people that say, well, it has to do with our location that we had on the sea. When we started having more fish in our diet, we had DHA and all these fish oils and that. But the point being that we don't know. We don't know how come we just all of a sudden started thinking this way, but whatever it was, we've had to cope with it, and we've made narratives out of it. And we've called these voices maybe the memory of Grandpa or the third grade teacher that said you suck at math, or maybe it's like a devil's telling me something, but all the cultures have different ways of trying to understand the disembodied voices until later it gets integrated into, no, this is my voice, my thoughts, who am I? It can get very crazy, but this is why Janes was a psychologist looking back at ancient texts, so it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about memories, though? Like memories of people saying things to you that you kind of held on to.
Visions, because it's imagination, it's magic, it's imagining.
Well, because it's an interesting thing about memory, too, right? If something happens, like there's been studies on this, literally like a couple hours later, the memory is changed and warped into something else.
Yeah.
Right? The brain does something different to it.
Yeah.
And, this is another interesting thing about memory is that there was a guy, I forget what his name was, but there was an ancient Greek guy who wrote all about, or he was written about how like this temple collapsed, and it collapsed over everyone during a dinner, and he had to remember where specific people were so we could pull them out of the rubble.
Oh,
right. And this was like this whole ancient story about memory, and how like, even in like classical Greece, they were memorizing Homer because no one was literate. So they were walking around singing Homer and memorizing this like from childhood. And like if you extrapolate that, through literacy and the written word and people being able to pull their ideas and their memories out of their head and put them on paper, it's like the human memory has atrophied over time to where like just, I can remember 10 years ago, I can remember anyone's phone number. I can remember a bunch of phone numbers, and now I can remember like 2 phone numbers.
Oh, I'll tell you the secret to that though. Epic poetry, Homeric epic. Poems they were word art. They had rhythm. They were meant to be like song.
Yeah.
Because that's how people would remember those things, because here's the deal. If I were to say, what's your favorite book? Say you say Harry Potter. Sorry, a lot of people like that. So like say Harry Potter. And I say, well, tell me how it goes. You're not going to be able to sit here and just say Once Upon a Time, Harry Potter. But I say, who's your favorite band? Maybe say, I don't know what you like. Who's your favorite band, Danny?
I don't have a favorite band.
Okay, well,
there's too many.
Too many. We'll say Pink Floyd. Whatever. So we'll say, if you have a favorite band, what are their songs? Tell me the lyrics. Chances are you're going to remember to sing all the songs of all the band's albums that you love.
Yeah.
Could be loads of things. You'll remember it because it's song. It plays in a very different part of our brain that is linked to culture. So, when you're younger, music is very important to teenagers. And what ends up happening too is that's the time where your brain understands, as silly as it sounds, the song of your people. You're made to have that memory very entrenched so that if you go off to another tribe or group, you'll remember that. So music and all of these different experiential things play in a different part of the brain. It makes a huge impact, which is why a lot of people, their favorite music is stalled between the ages of 16 and like 25. Because that's the coming of age time. So like in a tribal society, you'd be sitting and you're like 11 and you're watching the tribal music and dances and the what's called orgiastic behavior, like all the activities. You're not part of it yet, but you're learning. Once you become part of it, you're like, you're a man now and it's celebratory, etc. But that is your culture. That embeds a culture inside of you that doesn't go away. And so everything can be taken. You can be enslaved by another tribe or taken, but you'll always have your culture. And so that's why, to this day, many people are like, man, they just don't make music like they used to. When did they used to? Back when I was 18. Right. That's the song of your people, man. That's what that is. But yeah, so it goes through song. But the Pitaha people have no song. And this guy who was trying to convert them ends up telling them the story of John the Baptist getting his head cut off, and they laugh. And they're like, why is that funny? They were like, well, because he was too stupid to live. He should have just lived. Right. So he couldn't figure out what was going on. They tested him. Their corpus callosum's fine. They said basically it's the simplicity of the language, which allowed for them not to have concepts of quantity and what we would consider more abstract thinking. But they're happy and they're fine. And in fact, twist in the end, the missionary guy who goes there to tell them about Jesus.
They eat him.
No, man, that'd have been much better.
Oh.
No, he left his wife and kids and went and moved in with them and denounced his faith and became, I guess, one of the tribe.
Where was this geographically?
Amazon.
The Amazon.
Yeah. And you can you can go on YouTube and find footage of them and documentaries still. And he
and you were saying that
it.
Some people took this language and used it for computer coding?
They thought they would. They thought they could. They said it's so simple that maybe it could be instead of binary, maybe it'd be different. Maybe it's something we could use. Yeah, it's considered one of the most primitive or archaic types of language. But again, the consequence of which is they lack the abstract thought. So when there's only so many words, you lack the ability to abstract out, and your complexity of your thinking maybe is shaped. So in a language that only has so many words versus another, you can see some cultural differences in how they substitute ideas and get very just different in their thinking. And, I won't say better or worse. I'm just saying different. And you start to see a more advanced sort of mythos. But
I wonder how the brain would work with zero language, like before we had words.
Well,
I wonder what the mind was like back then.
I think it's like feral children. You've seen those?
Do you think it's possible, like if there was no words, no writing, no language, that people could communicate like telepathically?
I don't know about well, I think yes, but not now. I think in the sense that it would seem telepathic because our senses are so much less
take
developed.
On other cues. Your other senses would get more
Our brain's
intense.
plastic, absolutely. And so our oldest sense is smell. And that's something, when we meet people, we don't sniff their asses like dogs.
Right.
But we could have back in the day. We understood their body. We just don't do that anymore. But our sense of smell is like not as good as a dog's because we didn't use it. Yeah. So it would have been selected out. Like now we have different. So I think now if for whatever reason you took a feral child and put them out in the woods, they're not going to all of a sudden be able to like sniff things. They may a little bit because your brain just adapts to the surroundings. But I think though that earlier hominids probably had what would seem like a more telepathic way to communicate. I mean, that's how the whites of our eyes evolved, is so that we could like have subtle cues. Language.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's why.
Look at animals and look at the whites of their eyes, or those dogs that look creepily like people.
I had this DNA expert woman on here that was telling me that women are attracted to men largely by the pheromones they put out, the smells of their sweat when they sweat in their sweat glands. And they did a study on it. And what they found was the women, they took a bunch of different sweaty t-shirts from different men and they let them all smell them and like rate this on attractiveness. And the women who found like that sweat super attractive, they found out by studying the genome of those people that their immune systems matched perfectly with the man whose sweat that they liked.
Whoa.
So where their immune system was lacking, the man's sweat, based on their sweat, his immune system would make up for where hers fell short. And that way when they procreate, they would create a more robust child. Fucking,
well, that's amazing.
That blew my fucking mind.
That's wild. Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, the ape has no whites?
No.
Oh my God, that's wild.
But what's cool is like domestic dogs. You've had a dog, they kind of look like a person. They get very human-like that way. But it's for those micro expressions.
Right.
Yeah, I can look at you across the room and kind of be like, doing things with my eyes, and people will get that little micro. Evolution is amazing, but super, super fascinating. But there's so much more to it, and a lot of people are, again, building narratives around it. So, so no, I don't think that the Anunnaki flew down here in big spaceships and put the little beakers and did that. But I do think that through basic natural selection and different things, we've just evolved to, fit our environment the way we are now. And unfortunately, a lot of that is to be domesticated and to be ruled by what we now idolize as gods, who are just basically billionaires who are afraid to die.
So, okay, we got like 15, 20 minutes before you got to catch your Uber, but I want to wrap this up on what is your like big picture view on this whole disclosure fiasco?
Oh, it is a fiasco. Yeah. That's what exactly, it's a fiasco. So I think because a long time ago, it was like COINTELPRO'd, I think a long time ago, people started infiltrating, and I think that currently what we have going on is just, a couple things. One, it's good TV, it's good money. Some people are in it, they're grifting. But I think the overall worldview is that they're trying to usher in, again, like a new narrative, a new mythology. So, but it can't be new, because if Peter Thiel is, right, or has his way with it, it can't just be new. It has to be a new take on something old and familiar. So I believe that's why we're seeing a lot of the talk of, are they aliens or are they demons? Now, I think that's a valid question, actually, because I think that when you look at the entire history of it, what we're talking about is a phenomenology. People have experienced something, and based on their beliefs and their culture and their time, they're going to call it something. It could be jinn, it could be archons, it could be DMT elves, it could be whatever. But that's not the question, because that question's been out for a while. All of a sudden now, though, that's the big hot topic, and people are being mad about it. Like, I think of it as like a luxury belief, because We don't have time right now.
Exactly.
You know, like, okay, we used to be able to just like have that discussion. Now it's like, you know what? Table that. Who cares if they're aliens or demons? Who cares if you like Christianity or no? None of this matters right now. What matters is, why are they selling us this narrative? Why do they want us like thinking this way? And a lot of that, again, if you want to know, you look at not what just Peter Thiel has to say, but more so look at who he follows and admires, and that philosophy and psychology, the answer will emerge from that. We have to get out of the old way of thinking that they've trapped us in with the words that they trap us with. We have to adopt a new vocabulary and find new sources and have an open mind about it and say, let's not like have the division over this religion or that. That can be. Those are all valid discussions. But right now, if people really want to like, I guess, take action, they need to say, let's put that on the back burner. What is he doing? Why is he trying to get people to argue about like this? What's the Pope up to? What's going on? What's really at play?
I think one of the biggest red flags with the whole thing is that you have this whole disclosure movement in the government being pushed primarily by this dude James Clapper, who is the dude who lied to Congress about NSA spying on citizens, which like led Snowden to drop in all his stuff.
Yeah. Real credible guy.
The whistle on it. So like. Yeah, and then, you know, obviously Trump trying to release these UFO files in the midst of a war and the Epstein cover-up and all of that stuff. I feel like
that's a money grab.
It tells you everything you need to know about it, I think.
That's my view, is that the inside it's a money grab. I do know there's an individual in Canada. I'll have to leave this one I'll leave this one hanging for time. There is an individual in Canada who comes from a family with a lot of money, and he had a vested interest in this and paid a lot of money to get the career, I guess, kind of going for individuals, and also gave money to, not a lot, I don't think comparatively, but did try to fund Marco Rubio and Kristen Gillibrand. Had a vested interest in pushing this narrative.
Really?
Also has a keen interest in Enki and Enlil and Hermeticism. Side note, but again, that often happens where you see this. But there has been he funded the congressional hearings initially.
Really?
From Canada.
You can't say this dude's name?
I'll tell you after.
Is he not public? Is he not known?
Not really. He's known as he's known as the UFO philanthropist, and he's made some videos about my work. He contacted me.
He makes videos?
He has some strange, but not many. It's a weird thing. It's not like he makes videos. Okay. I don't understand what it's so weird. It's just so strange. He reached out to me. I had some discussions with him. He wanted to know some stuff, and then he referred me to some occult literature, as it always ends up being about UFO disclosures, government, et cetera, and then Hermeticism or otherwise. But yeah, that's why I have a hard time with a lot of this, even though some stories are cool. Like I'll just say, like Stephen Greer. I mean, this guy funded the Sirius Project. Come at me, Stephen Greer. I don't give a shit. You know, he's part of that Rockefeller group.
Yeah.
And so once that fades off, well, he was funded.
I was telling you yesterday
by a guy in Canada.
One of the things that Nathan Gillis was telling me was that he thinks that there's a single source behind the paranormal stuff and the UFO stuff, and we don't really have like the capacity to understand, or a framework to really understand what that is, and like put it in a box with language. Like it's something, and it could all be the same thing, and different manifestations of one single source that is not material, that we just don't know what it is. But there seems to be a very big overlap with like paranormal stuff and this whole UFO stuff. Yeah,
I think John Keel said it best. He called them ultra-terrestrial.
Yeah,
I think there is a phenomena there, but I think the problem is nobody really knows. Some people, again, the elephant thing, people have pieces and bits and parts.
Right, it's the
people who want to know. They're the ones funding those people with the bits and pieces, and they're the one trying to find the very root of it so that they can control it. As always, it's about control.
Yeah.
But no, the disclosure thing, it is a total psyop. And I think Sam Tripoli said it best when he said they're trying to astroturf Armageddon.
They're trying to astroturf Armageddon.
That's what they're doing, and I agree 100%. All my analysis, everything that I've done, all the different factions and stuff, they are not a monolith, like you said.
Yes.
There's groups, and they're powerful, and they're against each other.
Right.
And they're all in the same, but they're all humans, and they just don't want to be, though. They think of themselves as much higher. Wow. But they all agree. There's a good portion of them that want to rush to the end for different eschatological reasons. And, it's pretty dark, but they're astroturfing the end times. Shout out to Sam.
There's a whole lot more that we could cover. We're definitely going to have to do another one eventually, if you're down.
Totally.
But thank you for doing this. Tell people where they can find. I read every one of your Substacks, by the way.
That's cool.
Thank you for hooking me up with that. I love it. Tell people how to find all that stuff, and I'll link it all below.
Sure. thehfiles.com.
Perfect. That's it.
That's it.
I love it. Do we have Patreons?
We do. We have a few questions.
All right. That's the end of the show. Good night, everybody. We're going to Patreon. Thank you.